All right, good morning, everyone. It's time to get started. Welcome to the February 6, 2023 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And we are starting this morning with a discussion about the 360 review, and Cynthia Schur from Schur Management Consulting is here to talk with us. So welcome.
Is that microphone on? Is your microphone on?
Is there a light at the base?
Now there is. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. Let me know if you can't hear anything I say or wave something. I've been asked to talk about assessments and to clarify some terminology and some pieces about process, about different kinds of assessments that organizations do. And I'll go through my presentation, and I believe I've left plenty of time for questions if you have any of them, but I'm going to walk through the whole piece. And you know, if you have a burning question, by all means feel free, but I'll probably answer a lot of your questions as we go through. So it may be helpful to give you a little bit about my background. I've been an organizational development consultant for about the last 25 years. I've both managed entire 360 review processes for companies with a team of my own consultants, and I've also participated in 360 reviews on request from different organizations. Worked in every sector, public, private, nonprofit, including feedback in those different sectors. And a huge part of my focus is on professional development, creating development plans, and helping people get better and improve as professionals. I've been a board member, so I have a sense of what you're doing, although I have to tell you my admiration for the amount of time and dedication it takes to be on a city council is immense. And I have a sense of what it's like to be having governing responsibility for an organization. I do a lot of executive coaching for C-suite executives, and I'm certified in a bunch of different types of 360s, from leadership architect to Korn Ferry Voices instrument to a leadership versatility index. And that just may be helpful for you in background, is that this is not new stuff to me. I do this on the reg. So when you're looking at assessments for an organization, you have to start with, what is it we're trying to find out? What is it we're trying to learn? And so there's, at least three sort of columns there, which is, one is, are we trying to assess organizational health? How are we doing on fulfilling our mission? And are we able to recruit and retain the talent that we need and engage them to help us fulfill our mission? And then there's CEO performance, which is, whoever your chief executive is, in this case, a city manager, where you're looking at what kind of results are they producing, or are they on track to produce the results and meet our expectations? That's what a CEO performance review does. And then there's leadership development, and there's all kinds of ways to get leadership development and invest in it. You're looking at, are they a strategic thinker? Are they living up to the competencies that we think this organization needs in order to succeed? Is their behavior effective? How are they leading teams? And are they developing the careers of other people? And each of these has a different time horizon. Organizational health is a point in time. You say, how are we doing right now? Performance review is a look back. We set expectations, and we want to look back and say, are we meeting those expectations? Are we hitting those goals? Whereas leadership development is generally future focused. It's like, okay, yes, we're looking at people's perceptions in the past, but we're developing for the future. What do I need to work on in the future? And likewise, they have really different outcomes you're trying to meet by way of doing one of these assessments. Can we fulfill like I said before, can we fulfill our mission and attract the talent in an organizational health? do we give a raise or a bonus, or how do we set the next period's targets based on what happened in the last period? And the last one is, do we have a plan for establishing a leadership pipeline? Are we developing those leaders? Are we getting better and better every year? And those tools tend to look different. And this was one of the places where I noticed when I listened to the October 31st meeting, it seemed like there was some terminology that was kind of used loosely that may have been confusing. And so just to be clear, if you're looking at organizational health, the kind of tools you might want to use are employee engagement surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, retention or exit interviews, and customer satisfaction, or in your case, constituent satisfaction. And I've got the sort of timeline sort of blurred out at the bottom because it's somewhat arbitrary. It's when you deem it necessary. But most organizations do that every 1 to 2 years. Some are required by their professional associations to do those kinds of surveys every year for accreditation or whatnot. I know the hospitals all have to do a survey once a year to meet their certification. For CEO performance, the things you're looking at and the tools you're using are a performance review. You're looking at metrics. What can we measure? You're looking at milestones. Did we get to where we thought we were going to get by this point in time? And you may be benchmarking yourself against the performance of, other cities or other organizations that are similar to say, where are we in the top 20%? Are we in the lowest 20%? Where are we there? And then often there's a review of a job description. And those generally are done annually because usually people get a performance review every year. Are we going to get a raise? Is there a bonus involved? Does the job description change? Those are the things you're looking at. Leadership development has a whole variety of tools if you're growing leaders in your organization. And 360 feedback is one of them. And I'll go into depth about what a 360 review is in a few minutes. From a 360 review, you do a development plan. What am I working on? You may get executive coaching. You might join a peer group of people who also do your kind of job, and where there's peer coaching involved. You may belong to a trade association, and other forms of ongoing education, taking a class. So sometimes you tie some of these different pieces with values. And I was looking online to see if I could find a set of city values, and they may be the same as the ones I saw in the Parks and Rec plan of stewardship, quality of life, and sense of community. And so sometimes these different instruments are used tying those two. Here's what we say we want to do as a city, is we want to fulfill these goals. Here's how we do it. And we might be using those, we might be weaving those into some of these tools. So it's also important to remember whose responsibility is whose. And the council's responsibility, like a board of directors, is you hire, fire, and provide feedback to the chief executive or the city manager. You also have to do an annual performance review, as Diana's presentation said last fall. Management, of course, is separate from governance. And management's responsibility is to do the similar things for city employees, hire, fire, provide feedback, and to make sure that the operations of the city run smoothly. So different types of responsibility, governance and management. And usually they have different tools and different ways of measuring things. So one of the things that's always hard to understand is why would you separate performance review from professional development? And there are a lot of reasons for that. The purpose, which I outlined just in the last couple of slides, you're trying to learn different things in performance review from professional development tool. Different people generally have responsibility for different things, and so you're looking at whose responsibility is whose here, and usually it's a board's responsibility to do an annual performance review. It's the individual's responsibility to ask for professional development or to take it in. So very different responsibility. The nature of the feedback's different, metrics, milestones, benchmarks, versus perceptions, other people's perceptions of leadership. And then timing. You separate performance review from professional development because Perceptions are in the eye of the beholder, and what you don't want to do is have people giving leadership feedback thinking, oh my gosh, my boss's raise depends on this, so I'm going to sugarcoat everything and not give real feedback. Or if you've got somebody who's a detractor, it's like, oh, I have the opportunity to really, throw darts at someone. Neither of those are productive ways of engaging in either performance review or in professional development feedback, and you separate them out so there isn't undue influence there, and so that people feel like, the people who are evaluating performance are here, and that's their responsibility. And then what we're doing is we're taking a pulse and looking at what are perceptions of leadership. And you want to separate those out by time and space so that people don't get those confused. And then, of course, the outcome is different, which I talked about. So when would you do something completely different? And you wouldn't necessarily, you might still do a performance review, but when would you not do a 360 review for professional development? If you know somebody is already not succeeding in their job, it should have shown up in their performance review. If your expectations of them as a leader and as, and as the head of an organization aren't clear, then you really got to look at whether it's fair to use either one of these tools. It's like they don't know what they're trying to achieve because it's not been clear. And then you don't want to do it when you're avoiding conflict, when you're avoiding having a tough discussion, or when you're avoiding making a decision. And again, coming back to who's responsible for making decisions and giving feedback around for leaders. And for all of these, you want to look at, is the system we're using the right price? Is it over the right time horizon? And what goals do we have? Is it hitting the target? Is this an appropriate instrument? So I'm going to take a deep dive into what a 360 review is. Again, when I listened to the meeting, lots of sort of casual terminology about this, so I'm going to get more precise about it. And different organizations use different language to talk about their tools, so I'm trying to capture what I think I heard in the last meeting, but if there are confusing terms or if there's things we are using different ways, by all means, use the language that you're most comfortable with, as long as it's precise, because that's important. So 360 review, just like it says, 360 degrees all the way around. There is an individual at the center of it. There's an individual at the center of it. And what you're looking at is how are they perceived by the people above them, by their peers, and by their direct reports, and sometimes even their constituents or people outside you bring in. Sometimes you do customers or, in the city's case, constituents. And you get those perspectives. So it provides perspectives all the way around. A lot of times it's based on a defined set of competencies, like here's what it takes to be a good leader, a good city manager. And my guess is the one that Aaron does through his city manager's organization, someone has come up with a set of defined competencies for city managers in that particular instrument. And it often also is organized around the organization's values. I've seen an entire instrument based on, here's our values, how well is this person leading into us living into those values. And it provides really comprehensive feedback, and it's confidential, on where someone is strong and where they have opportunities to develop. Those usually come out very clearly at the end of a 360. It's like, okay, we can see this. And different types of instruments will actually map that out statistically and give you pretty interesting analysis on that. Whole bunch of kinds of 360 reviews. And again, coming back to my price and timing and target slide, there are, dozens of off-the-shelf kinds of 360s. From the sort of, I don't know whether it's pop psychology, but it's fairly cursory. It's helpful, it can be helpful, but it's fairly cursory. The StrengthsFinder 2.0, which is based on strengths-based analysis. And you can get those just off the shelf. Usually a vendor will have a template. You might be able to customize a few questions in there. But usually the reporting results aren't very flexible. They've got their software, going to chunk through it. And, you get things like, here's the highest rated items, lowest rated items, and here where there may be some positive or negative blind spots. And again, you can sometimes tailor the open-ended questions. A customized competency-based 360, you can use a Korn Ferry one where you can select out of 36 competencies that are extremely well-researched and well-defined and say, well, these are the 10 that are most important to this leader's role. How well is this person doing? And they actually rank them on, you have the opportunity to say, this is how important this competency is in the role. This is how well I perceive this person is doing. And again, you get that view from up, down, and across. So if some people manage up really well, and that just comes naturally to them. And I've seen other people who manage down really well, but whose superiors don't have any idea what they're accomplishing or how they're doing it because they haven't managed up well. So you can, assess some of those pieces. And then there's other ones that look at operational compared to strategic excellence, or empowering versus forceful leadership. So you can look at, a lot of different pieces here. And then, so this is an example of something that would be competency-based that's developed by a research institution where definitions are really clearly spelled out. Like for the competence financial acumen, this particular survey, and I just cribbed it off the survey, defines what skilled looks like. In this case, here's what somebody who's skilled in financial acumen looks like, and it would also give you the unskilled definition, so you'd be able to rate it or grade it. And just for another example to give you a sense of, under developing talent, they would have a positive definition for what somebody does do well for developing talent, and this one I happened to pull was and here's what unskilled looks like there. And there could be a ton of other competencies listed too, like how well do they manage complexity, how well do they make decisions, how are they at balancing different stakeholders, how self-aware are they, how courageous are they as a leader, how well are they driving vision and purpose. All of those things can wind up in a competency-based 360 where you've defined what those competencies are that you're looking for. And then finally, there are interview-based 360s, and that's where you hire an outsider, somebody like me who goes and talks to people, somebody who's neutral and doesn't have a stake in anything, and interviews people. Usually those are 4 or 5 fairly basic questions, and as you talk to people, trends and patterns emerge. It tends to be a really, really rich data set, because instead of just getting this little quip on an open-ended question like, has great staff meetings, you can find out when you're interviewing somebody, what is it that they do that makes staff meetings great? And so you get very specific feedback because you can do all those follow-on questions. And I've had clients say that was the most valuable professional development they ever had, was getting to actually interview people at a point in time and saying, here's how people perceive you. And of course, cost varies with, the time involved. You can go from a very simple 360 where probably the setup and the initial piece of it is closer, at this day and time is about $5,000. And then sometimes it's less expensive once you've got it all set up, to an interview-based 360, which takes a ton of time. And again, Diana said this in the last meeting, if it takes a ton of consultant time, it could be from $10,000 to $15,000, depending on how much time is invested. So how do you do this so that it's a positive process? And so that everybody involved feels good about it, they feel like people knew what was going to happen, that they get good feedback, and that they have the opportunity to develop at the end. And most best practices will say this. I certainly live by this, where a leader always goes first. And who, if you're going to roll it out in an organization, the head of the organization is the first person who gets 360 feedback. Now, what's interesting is when the Sarbanes-Oxley was passed in 2002, boards, organizations like yours, also started looking at self-evaluation. So whether the council would want to do a self-evaluation or not is up to you, but it's certainly gotten a lot more attention in the last 20 years that, we should be looking at our performance. We can all get better, and we can do a self-evaluation. In order to do that, which is very helpful if you take action on it and if you're willing to commit to it. But certainly in an organization the size of a city, the first person who would get 360 feedback would what you'd want to be the city manager, the head of the organization. The second piece is you identify appropriate people. Who's appropriate to give feedback? Who has enough interaction with that person that they can actually give them concrete, behavior-specific feedback on how they show up as a leader? This next one is really important, and that is how is giving people enough background and training to respond in a helpful way to 360 feedback. And what I mean by that is helpful feedback is distinguished from unhelpful feedback by how specific it is. Helpful feedback is a specific behavior that if I choose to change it, remember the person at the center of the 360 always has the choice to change something or not. If I choose to change it, I would know what to do. Unhelpful feedback is the story I walk around with about somebody else, or name calling, or anything that's a pot shot. Not helpful, waste of time. All that causes is defensiveness and, quite frankly, a lot of head scratching. I wonder why they came up with that story about me. So, instead of saying, this person is a jerk, much more helpful to say, frequently interrupts other people. I've noticed they particularly do this when they go on too long. Would be helpful if they gave speakers a time limit. So all those things are things I could change if I wanted to. I can't change your perception of me as a jerk unless you tell me what's contributing to that perception. So training people to give helpful feedback is super important. Otherwise, you wind up with a few ratings and not much to do with anything else. Then you usually do a debrief. Again, 360s have the self in the center. You do a debrief with select individuals. For one, it's not at a policy level. It's a individual leadership development exercise that helps people gain awareness and insight into their own, how they show up as a leader. So you usually choose, it's usually the chair of the board and one other person. In your case, it might be your mayor and your council president. And those are the people who usually go over feedback with someone if it's 360 feedback. And, again, it's not at a policy level. It's not, and it's very personal. Because when you're at this level where you're doing a 360 with somebody who's at that vice president or C-level, it's nuanced feedback. These people already come to work on time and, get stuff done and know how to get results through other people, right? So it tends to be very nuanced. And most people want to continue to get better and expand their self-awareness. So you debrief with a few people. When I do it, I always do the first debrief just with the person who is receiving 360 feedback. And I don't know about you guys, but when somebody tells me I don't do something perfectly, I tend towards just a little bit of defensiveness, just a tiny bit. And so it usually helps to debrief with that person first, find out what they heard, what they didn't hear. What I find a lot is people don't absorb positive feedback about themselves very well. People at high-level positions are always trying to get better, and it's like, no, that's something to lean into. If people say you do this really well, keep doing that, lean into that. And so I usually do a debrief first with someone, and then we debrief with people who are in a position to help coach, reinforce, and encourage the person who's working on their leadership development. Then the last step is to, just quick summary, here's what I heard, and here's what I want to work on. And I usually tell people to just pick one or two things, maybe two or three, but most people have a full slate before they start working on their leadership development, and there's usually a couple of things that stand out that they want to pick year over year to work on. Again, the debrief is with the leader and then the supervisor. Some people share their results with their team and say, hey, I'm really working on this year. Would you check in with me after a meeting and let me know how I did? A development plan is what I'm going to work on and how I'm going to develop it. And then there's all kinds of resources for development from, attending a class, from stretch work assignment, from trying something different to executive coaching. Here's what a 360 report will tell you. It gives other people's perceptions all the way around you, right? Compared with your own, because you respond to it as well. So I perceive that I'm really great at running meetings. My team thinks not so much. So helpful to find that out and see what I could do. Any positive or negative blind spots. Sometimes people do things really well that they don't ever give themselves credit for, and sometimes they're doing something that's super annoying to people that they don't know. One example is I had a client who got feedback on her 360 review that people thought she was playing favorites, that she had her favorite group and her in-click. She's like, God, I cannot figure out why people would say that. And it finally dawned on her that her office had all these cubicles outside it. She had a large team. And she would stick her head out at lunchtime and say, hey, who wants to go to lunch? And the people who could hear her were the 3 or 4 people right outside her cubicle. So again, you can have a blind spot like that and not know that unless you get feedback. And it tells you what other people think you could work on. And how many of us could not tell other people what we think they should work on? Most of us would love to do that. Whether they choose to do that or not is another story. A 360 review will not tell you who said what. It has to be confidential, and in each category you have to have at least 3 people or more to make it confidential. A 360 review is not anonymous in that I believe you should always know who gave you feedback. I just find that too social media-ish. Like, we want to know who gave feedback, but we don't disclose who said what, nor do we encourage anyone to go looking for who said what. So it doesn't tell you who said what. It doesn't tell you how valuable you are to the organization. Some people get great results and really need to work on their leadership development, and they may be very valuable to the organization. And it certainly doesn't tell you whether or not you're a good person, right? It's just feedback in a point in time. Feedback is the only way we get better at things. The fringe benefits to this, to an organization, is that organizations that invest in their folks, they show that they're valued. It's an investment. It's an investment of time, of money, of attention, and usually people are delighted to be able to get this kind of feedback because it's rare in a lot of jobs. It also signals by all the people who fill out the survey, what are the things that this organization is looking for in leaders? Because they all read all of those and respond to those. So it's a way of communicating that. Hopefully you're communicating that in other ways too, but that really reinforces it because we're asking for your feedback on it. It can have a big ripple effect. Lots of people are involved in a 360, or at least a dozen or so. And it helps tell people that feedback is okay. Feedback is a good thing. We want to know how we're doing. We're open to it. Yes, I might have trouble swallowing it at the beginning, but I'm open to it, and I want to figure out what I can do to be better. So here's my summary do's and don'ts. 360 feedback is not the same as an annual performance review. Don't pretend to use it like that. It's no substitute for dealing with a real problem. Don't ever go on who hunts, who said what. And again, that's easier with an interview-based 360 because it's easier for the interviewer to disguise it. If somebody always types in all caps, you're going to be able to figure out who that person might be on a web-based one. Name-calling, pouncing on people, surprising people with feedback is never a good idea. I heard some of you say at the last meeting, it's like, well, we do go and give Aaron feedback on an ongoing basis. We don't just do this once a year. That's a good practice. Like, if something's on your mind, you share it in real time. You don't wait a year to share it. That's not fair. Don't surprise anyone about it, and then don't just do it once. If you're going to do a 360 review, people like to be able to see their progress. And sometimes it takes a while for things to sink in. I had one client who had the same feedback 3 years in a row. And the first year, the problem was the people who gave him feedback. And the second year, the team had changed a little bit, but it was still their problem, not his problem. And by the third year, he was like, oh, maybe there's something here that I should pay attention to. So you want to see that. And it's also really fascinating to see these over time because people do grow and change. It's why we believe in professional development. We can all grow and change. So if you're going to do it, have a clear and simple process that you can communicate to people. Let people know that it's confidential and not anonymous. You start with whoever the leaders are. Train people about how to give helpful feedback. Make sure there's some follow-up. Like a development plan afterwards is super helpful for the person who receives it, primarily, and then potentially for people who are coaching them or mentoring them. Provide some resources for follow-up and make sure they get ongoing feedback so it's not just an annual event. Any questions?
Thank you. It looks like DJ has a question.
Sir?
So yeah, you did briefly touch on this, just wanted to expand a little bit. So, as you watched our meeting when we had begun this discussion, which I appreciate very much, this has been brought up as an evaluation tool. Now, I don't know if that's the solid intent of council, but it's been part and parcel to the conversation. And my review and understanding of 360 reviews, because heretofore I have not been privy, are that they're not a good tool for evaluation. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, because they measure different things. You know, people can get results in an organization and still have plenty of things to do to work on their own leadership development. And so usually a governing body is looking at, did we hire the right person to get the right results? We all have things we can work on. We're going to provide this other tool or not, up to you. We're going to provide this other tool so that they can see how they're perceived in terms of, and that's very subjective, right? Our perceptions are all very subjective, up, down, and across. It's why sometimes people manage up well, people manage down, or don't manage down well, or vice versa. Whereas a performance review should be measurable, observable, to expectations and to goals.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Rob. Sir.
So, kind of along the same lines as what DJ was asking, I think, if we went back to slide 4.
It's probably easier for me to do on the paper.
Tools and
which one?
Tools and timing.
Yeah,
Yeah, tools and timing.
go in there. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. Animated slides don't always work well with this, with going backwards. Yes.
Okay. So, while you were pretty clear to separate these organizational health versus CEO performance, you know, when we look at employee engagement survey, employee satisfaction survey, exit interviews, et cetera, let's just say we had, and we did during the last couple of years, which may be more a function of COVID times or some other changing thing, but we did have a tremendous amount of open spaces at all levels of the organization, from literally from top to, well, not from the very top, but from upper top to bottom. So let's say we have a lot of, let's say employee exit interviews were to give us some idea as to why we have vacancies or not. But my point is, I guess, let's say as a counselor, I thought, gee, the manager is doing a really excellent job in these, 3 areas. And then when we look at the organizational health and we happen to do a survey of the employees or the exit interviews or whatever, it turns out, gee, my perception was not the same as the employee's perception. There was a lot of dissatisfied employees. There was a lot of, for whatever reason, they didn't, for whatever reason, a lot of dissatisfied employees. And here I am as a counselor thinking, my gosh, the manager's got all these satisfied employees under him. So while those are 2 separate categories in your methodology, to me, they would be inextricably linked. And while maybe I would want to think that the manager deserved really high grades for something in his performance review, when I actually were to look at an employee survey, I would find out, well, he's actually not communicating well, or he's not motivating well, or he's just not the inspirational leader that I thought he was. So how could I actually keep out from my review of him or her what the other people in the organization feel about them if they're completely different? And they could be. As you've said, you can have blind spots. So you have it 2 separate categories. I just don't know how those 2 things could be separated.
So what you're looking at is this person performing their job, right? And I'm assuming that your employee exit surveys is all levels of the organization. And there's, I mean, I would guess, usually when they do exit interviews, there's a lot of them, and you don't control that at all. I mean, I don't think you can take your own perceptions and completely erase them out, but I do think you need to validate things. Like, there's a million reasons people leave organizations. In the last 2 years, I don't have a single client who hasn't been desperate to hire people. You know, there's been all of that. You know, I'm not sure what business you're in, but everybody has had a lot of vacant positions. So I think you kind of have to weigh it and just say, you know, are we still getting the results that we want to get? You know, I can look at the employee exit interviews, but, you know, some of them are going to have direct contact with that person and some of them they're not. And you don't have a lot of control over that. So I kind of think you have to use your own judgment and say, well, this is helpful in understanding this, or this isn't helpful in understanding this.
Well, which would be my perception, or put it this way, that would have been going in before you got here today, that would be how I would think it should be. And yet, you know, and again, you know, obviously black and white is easy in life and gray is really hard, whatever the subject is. But, you know, while, you know, DJ asks, geez, should this be used as an evaluation tool? On the one hand, no. On the other hand,
I'm sorry,
should
what are you
a
referring to?
360 review be used as an evaluation tool? On the one hand, no. On the other hand, it would be inextricably linked to the information that you may gather about why the organization is not succeeding to the degree that we would all hope. So again, to me, it's much more gray than black and white as far as, and again, those two columns are a really good example of, you know, it'd be impossible to ignore what, say, 10 employees have to say in my evaluation if I have no way of knowing other than through those 10 employees.
So the important thing to remember about a 360 is that the person is at the center and they're seeking leadership development feedback, right? And they're seeking how are people perceiving me up, down, and across, right? And they have to weigh what they want to change and what they're not going to change. Because what's effective, you know, it'd be lovely to please all of the people all the time. But they have to sort of see, you know, that's individual leadership feedback. That's really different than looking at a whole batch of exit interviews and saying people who left had a reason to leave, right? That's already biased. You know, unless you're doing people who stayed, why did they stay? And again, your purpose, I came back to this slide because your purpose is really different. What you're looking at when you're doing exit interviews and all of that is, are we able to attract and retain the people we need to accomplish our mission, to do our work, to provide the citizens of Grants Pass with the services they need to live here. That's really different from, is the individual leader leading people and hitting the performance targets we've set, which is different from a more nuanced tool around how am I perceived as a leader. Like different purposes. But, you know, all the information you have is going to swirl around in your head regardless, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and along a, you know, kind of a similar line, and this would be an extreme situation that I would hope we would never have to deal with, but what you mentioned later about, you know, not being concerned with who said what or confidentiality and so forth, I mean, obviously there's a limit to that because if there was harassment issues or bullying issues or things of that nature, who said what becomes critical, doesn't it?
Okay, that's a completely different, if somebody's got a complaint, they don't put it on somebody's 360, they go straight to legal, right? Or
well,
they go to the ombudsman.
They may not have, you know, I mean.
Well, they're sure not going to put it on a leadership development tool like that. I mean, that's a different path. You know, and certainly that if there is a discrimination issue, you know, that's something that presumably you all are also accountable for.
If
right?
we know
Pursuing.
about it.
Yeah, if you know about it, right.
Right.
Right. So, and, you know, sometimes that shows up in employee surveys. Do you feel comfortable going to an ombudsman, legal, or whoever if there's an issue? But yeah, no, that wouldn't show up on a 360. If it does, other people aren't doing their jobs.
Rick is online and he has a question. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. So on our annual evaluation of the city manager, we have a question that says, how do you feel, and it's not exact, the governance of employees, and yet we have, as city councilors, we don't go around canvassing employees to see how they like the city manager and so forth. So how can this 360 be used? Again, it's confidential and we don't know who's saying it and so forth, but to get a feeling of employees that we don't question them, as I said, how they
I'm
react
sorry,
or-
I couldn't hear well enough to answer
So
any question.
on the manager's evaluation, there's a question about how he interacts with employees or how the management is, and the council has felt that they don't have an appropriate window to get that feedback from employees. And so I guess Rick is asking for your insight on that.
So
Thank
usually,
you.
was that correct, Rick?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. There's a little bit of an echo in here, so it's hard to figure out. So, all right, let me make sure I understand here. Usually in a CEO performance evaluation, performance review, you're looking at results, and a big part about leading an organization is getting results through other people. So that in itself is a measure, because it would be really hard to run a city all by yourself. You're either getting results through other people or not. I'd also say that in a lot of these tools, they should all have an NA. And if you don't feel comfortable, if you're a brand new counselor and you're like, wow, I haven't really been around often enough, I shouldn't respond to this, that should always be an option on surveys, because we're not omniscient. We're omnipresent. We don't know what we haven't had experience looking at before. But again, that is something where anytime you're asked to fill out a survey, going from your own experience is usually the best. This has been my experience. I noticed that Aaron says hello to people, or that he gets timely reports, or that people produce what we ask for. All of that is getting results through other people. Is that close enough to the question?
Yes, I'm somewhat hesitant, because I guess if we're going to be asked that question, I think we should have the input. And I'm not sure, like you said, if we don't have the option not applicable, or we don't comfortable answering that question. So maybe that question should not be on city manager evaluation, or if we had I want to say modification or a simple form of employee kudos from the employees that we can use when we give an assigned value to that question.
My recollection from that meeting was that was kind of on the table for you all, is to go back and look at the evaluation tool. I think you will want to do that, especially in light of what else you might be doing. I also want to be really clear that leadership development tool, a 360, that's not normally something that a whole group would see the results of. That's super in the weeds, it's super personal. Usually you get a summary where you might get a one-pager that says, the person receiving the feedback would say, here's what I heard, here's what I'm working on. But yeah, that's
I think my understanding of what the council's looking for here, and a lot of it does center around that question, which may be need to be reviewed, or at least have the NA option to it. But I think the heart of it here is that the council feels that they don't have a window to look at the organizational health and to get feedback at the employee level. And I know personally, having worked in organizations, with boards, I've seen that from the employee end, that there may be things that you're just, dying for the board to know, and it's not coming through that filter. And so I think that's kind of the heart of what we're looking at here, maybe more than the leadership development aspect of things, if we could.
Yeah,
if you have suggestion for how to handle that in a way, and that the 360 review is not the right path, then I think the council would like to hear more about that.
So the employee engagement surveys that I've seen, and again, I don't do those, but those can be super valuable, and most large organizations will do an employee engagement survey, and it will not only give you, the way they're done is they slice and dice the data a whole bunch of ways. And so you'll even see by individual department how people were rated and on a level of different types of competencies, leadership things, and you get a ton of information out of those. That may be more what you're looking for, is an employee engagement survey, because engagement is tied really closely to productivity. And it will, like I said, it rates. You can look at the organization overall. Here's how we're doing as a city. You can look at, here's how the leader of the organization is how their employees are engaged or not. You know, that's where the kind of thing like, you know, is open to suggestions comes up. Like, if we have good ideas, where do those good ideas go? And some department heads may be super open to that, and they're going to talk about it, and others are like, we've always done it this way, thanks very much for your advice. You know, so it could go very differently. But an employee engagement survey would give you that kind of a look into the organization. And they tend to be fairly specific.
Brian, did you still have a question?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Sarah really got at the heart of my question, but just to kind of follow up on what she was saying, could you explain a little bit of the difference between an employee engagement survey and an employee satisfaction survey?
Not really. I can't.
Yeah, they sound pretty similar.
They used to always call them employee satisfaction surveys, so I put both terms in there, and now they tend to be called employee engagement. What I've seen is, on both kinds of surveys, they correlate really highly with employee retention and with productivity in organizations. They're kind of, some people are used to hearing employee sat, some people are now used to hearing employee engagement, so not a huge distinction there.
Okay, thank you.
If there is one, I don't know. Yeah.
Are there other questions?
Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment that I basically agree with Sarah's assessment with what I think, at least myself, and I think most of the council was looking for. You know, it's really hard to, you know, the council would essentially really damage its own credibility if it were giving a manager really good grades and all the employees thought, oh my gosh, no, what are they, they're so isolated, they have no idea what's going on. And that's our concern, is what is going on. You know, we don't, and we have, as Brian, I think Sarah said, we have no window. And that's part of the structure of our government here. It's kind of the way it's supposed to be. You know, there's supposed to be a firewall between us and the employees. Well, we'd also, and they're, you know, that's our structure here. And the firewall is the manager. But I know that I'd like to be able to credibly evaluate how the employees feel about the manager's style and effectiveness. And right now, I have no ability to do that. And I think that's what Sarah I think that's what she captured.
So following up on the mayor, can I speak? Thank you. I think there's some concern too, maybe instead of, about the city council. And I can't dodge that, but I was wondering, in terms of these tools, how that feedback to us can be valuable in terms of our performance. And I wouldn't look at it as a negative thing, as to say, I'm doing this wrong and I need to fix it, or Brian's doing this wrong and he needs to fix it. But what do we need to learn together and collectively to make things even better? And so as we do this, it's going to cost some money. To do it halfway, I don't think accomplishes the goal, to be honest with you. And I think it kind of leads down, in some people's minds, a predetermined path that may not be appropriate. So I think we need to do it for both the council, if that's what we're going to do, and our leadership, and learn from it so that we can be even more successful if we're going to spend the money to do it. I think we need to get the best benefit out of it. And so that's where I'm at, and that's my professional opinion.
DJ?
Have you seen these tools utilized for board of directors or council governments?
Well, yes. So boards of directors do self-evaluations. I mean, SOX requires that now. That's a best practice for nonprofit boards. I would be surprised if there isn't something in your city council governments that doesn't already have a survey that says, what does a self-evaluation for a city council look like? So yeah, I've done a lot of those. I have done a lot of those with boards, not with the city council. Rob?
Yeah, I have to ask Joel, I'm not, because he said something I don't understand. You said something about this could be used somehow, or misused, I guess, to come to a predetermined outcome. You used the word predetermined. Who would be predetermining it, and what would that outcome be, and how could it be used that way? I don't have that concern or fear at all.
So, it may not happen, Rob. It may happen. I saw at our last performance evaluation, people said they didn't know what Aaron was doing, and I believe them. And then they said because they don't know, they're going to fail him. And to me, that's not fair. That's a predetermined outcome. And I saw that on the account of several people that it was obvious to me they had talked about it beforehand. Whether they had or not, maybe I'm wrong. It's just my professional judgment. And I need to call that out because that's not what it's about. It's about having us have an even better city government to serve our people. And so it's just my professional opinion. You don't have to accept it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to spend a lot of time on this, but I made it actually very clear during the evaluation. The reason I gave a poor grade on that is because the year before I had given the manager and the council essentially a year's notice to say, the year before I said, you can take my score out of the average, because I thought that was reasonable and fair. And my score was removed from the average the year before. But when nothing happened in that year, and the manager actually said he did not want, at least not, put it this way, he was going to have to think about it and sign off. I'm like, well, look, you're going to keep asking me this question and go out of your way to not give me the results, then this year I'm not going to be as gracious and remove my score. And that's exactly what I said. So I don't believe I was predetermined, and I don't think it was out of the realm. But I gave everyone a year, and I'm like, you're still going to keep asking me the question, I'm going to have to do this. And not that I wanted to do it, but I had to do it.
Well, I respect your opinion, and my professional opinion remains unchanged.
All right, questions? DJ?
I have a question for Aaron. So I understand that you've utilized these kind of tools inside of the city, and I think it's appropriate that you have an opinion to talk about those kind of utilization of these tools and what your experience was like using those tools and what you've garnered from that, if you choose so. I think it might be important to understand from your perspective how you've used them and what you've garnered from that.
Yeah. 360s are a valuable tool. I've utilized 360s, and I need to utilize 360s whether I like them or not to be a credentialed city manager through the ICMA. So it is a tool that I respect and a process that I respect. I think it is an investment in my professional development and the development of the organization. And so it's a tool that I recognize and appreciate. And moving forward, it is, and I'll continue to do so. So I'm excited about the concept of potentially also moving this forward a little more and maybe looking at doing more 360s with the leadership teams for their own personal and professional development above just mine as the CEO. And as was mentioned this afternoon now, is that it starts with the CEO, it starts with the city manager, and to continue to do that. These are valuable. They're valuable because we have a great organization. We have great X-team. We have great members that always are looking at bettering themselves, or they wouldn't be here. And so, just like myself, I always look at and try to gain additional information and better myself, and that is a tool to do so. But it is a personal tool for personal development, not for an evaluation tool.
Valerie?
Yeah, there's something I know that in the past, I would say this last year was a washout, because I look at all of the vacancies we had and all of the team building that had to happen in terms of rebuilding a team, and it wasn't just us, it was across the board, people leaving everywhere for post-COVID, what they call it. So there was a lot of issues this last team. And in the years past, I know I've heard a lot about the I value and the programs that you worked with your team. I think it was the year before last that you actually talked a little bit about that. And I think that is sometimes you don't tout those things, because those are things that I know that you do and that you do that building. And it's not something that we necessarily see. I've heard it just because I've heard it occasionally from you or from somebody. And I think that maybe, as she said, sometimes you don't give yourself the credit for what you do behind the scenes. And so that's not really brought forward. And I think I've always questioned that first, and I think that it's really the first question on the city manager evaluation, which says, you know, how is he managing the members? And that's not something, because we've all kind of had our hands slapped for going back around to go to the people and the heads and been told, no. You know, and I understand it now more than ever, because I understand that that's not my role, that is your role. It's your job to run the city and have a good team. I think that you, in this last year, showed me how your expectations are high enough that you don't just take anybody onto your team, because that's what took so darn long to build the team, is because you weren't just going to take and fill the role because somebody had applied. And I think once again, that's something that's never really brought up, that fact that, you know, we didn't take the first person or even the second person. Sometimes we went out for the third person, because quality in our city is important and valuable to you. But it's hard for the council to see that. And in looking at this chart right here, what I can definitely see is that we don't have anything tangible to see how that is doing, other than how the city is being run. And in this last year, I mean, we didn't run as well as we could have because of vacancies and all of the issues we had trying to find people. You know, I never saw any exit interviews. I didn't, you know, I mean, that's just not something we see. So I think that's kind of where we're coming from. My thoughts is we need to go in as a council or as a small committee and go through and clarify what we can do to fill that void, is what I see. I just see something that we need to do to fix it. And, you know, those are my thoughts.
Aaron?
Yeah, Counselor, thank you for those comments. And I do think that it would be appropriate for us to get a small subcommittee similar to what we've done in the past and take a look at the current evaluation, maybe redefine what some of those categories are that you're looking at for your evaluation of the city manager, and come up with a tool that may be better utilized by council and where they'll feel more comfortable about the categories that they're judging. I think that's important. And we are engaged in and have are in the process right now of gathering the information and putting it into something that we can digest. But we do employee engagement or satisfaction surveys, and we have one that we just completed. And I sent a message out to all of our staff, I think it was last week. Currently right now, we are looking at the feedback that we got from our staff. And we're going to try to see if there are any kind of, and what kind of similarities or commonalities there are with some of the comments. And I want to get back to the organization with regards to what those common threads are, and talk to the organization in general about that and see if there's areas that we can work on. And then also get more specific in the departments and potentially the divisions based on the feedback that we got from this employee engagement survey. So then we can address some issues, strengths and weaknesses associated with individual departments or divisions. And I can share some of that information with council and give you a report on those and what information we're gathering, and then steps that we're taking to try to improve the organization and the culture that we're developing here.
Val? I just wanted to add, and this is kind of going back to what Joel said and Rob said too, is I think what happens, and having been on now for 8 years, I'm going to my 8th year, when councils change, expectations change. And I think that is the issue, is that he has to bounce off of us. So when suddenly you have new people coming on and suddenly they have these expectations, what I have felt in this last year is I have felt that a lot of the issues have come from the council because we put so many more demands on the ex-staff and we had less staffing. And so to, at the end of the time, come back and say, well, let's blame it on Aaron because we should have had this and that and whatever is not really fair, because a lot of those expectations came from a new people and new expectations of what the city manager's job should be. Because I can tell you, I mean, I've sat on a couple councils where, you know, he was like 4 or 5 across the board. And so then, you know, 2 years later, he's down on 1, 2. It's just like, how do you bounce around like that? That's kind of like a school teacher having one class that's just, they love her, and the next class, you know, it's a whole different group of kids. And it's just like, oh, I can't do anything to keep them happy. I mean, that's something that he has to deal with. I don't think that we all appreciate that the demands that we put on the staff and have expectations to bring things back. So I think that's what's kind of thrown us off, is being clear in the very beginning and then maybe should be done in strategic planning. What are our expectations of our city manager? What do we expect him to do and produce? So I think that's part of it as well.
Joel?
I'm trying to capture the intent, I think, of the topic. It seems like we have 3 options moving forward. One is do nothing, which would have the employee, let me use the right word, engagement survey that is existing and go forward. We could keep that and have the 360 feedback in addition to that to make things even better. Or if we wanted to have 1 year and try the employee engagement survey from an outside source rather than an inside source, that would be very valid as well. And then if you wanted to spend the most money, which I'm sure I would be in favor of, is you could do both the 360 and the employee engagement survey. So I think that's our decision space, and I don't think we can lose with any of those options. I think it's with the intent of making things even better and trying to translate those values throughout the organization in a positive way. So that's my thoughts as we move forward.
Brian?
So I have kind of a unique perspective on this because we had a situation at the school district just a few years ago where we were not getting the feedback that the board needed to get on the superintendent, and the firewall was keeping us from knowing what was really happening in the organization. And so for a couple of years we fought to maybe now that I'm learning what tool is appropriate, maybe the 360 review in that situation was not appropriate, but that was the tool that we knew to be available to get that feedback. So we used that. We got feedback from the directors that was very mixed. And so that kind of reaffirmed the suspicions that some of us had. And now, now we have a new superintendent, and now, things are resolved. I don't think that's the situation here with Aaron. However, there's a similar firewall, and we have no idea, we have no feedback from the directors, we have no feedback from the employees, so I don't know. And as a council, we need to know at some level, we need to have a window inside the organization, and maybe a 360 is not the appropriate tool. Maybe the employee engagement survey from a third party that is unbiased is the appropriate tool, but as a council, we need to have some mechanism to be able to get feedback from the other side of Aaron, and we don't have that now. So it sounds like maybe the engagement survey is the appropriate tool now that I've learned about this, but I think we need something.
Yeah, I think what I've heard repeatedly in these discussions, because we've had 2 or 3 previous discussions on this same topic, is maybe not that the council is seeking a 360 review, but that the council definitely wants that window into employee satisfaction and how the organization is running at the boots on the ground level, so that they're not ever blindsided, by thinking, if the manager is to be evaluated on goals, and that we're, let's say we are achieving all the goals, and that it looks very nice from this picture, and then you learn on the other side how the goals are being achieved, is not good. I think that's what's missing here. And so I think, the fact that we're doing the employee satisfaction survey is great, but the council isn't seeing that. We're not able to see the results. So I think that's where we're at here. And so I don't know, what probably Aaron would like to do to resolve that, but I think that's the issue. Rob?
Yeah, so and I completely agree with everything you said, and I'd just like to add one other aspect. Not only does the council not see the results, the council had no input in the creation of the survey. And it's also, as Brian mentioned, it's not done by necessarily a neutral third party. So if the council wanted something of, and I do, something of value, to me, I would want to at least have some input, or at least have to sign, the ability to sign off on what the survey looks like, and I would prefer if a third party were conducting it. And then that would essentially satisfy what I'm looking for, which I guess is, and if we can all, if the council agrees with that's kind of what we're looking for, I think that's kind of what Rick said as well, but I was getting at, maybe we can ask you what you think you could design, or where, how you would take that, if that's what we're looking for. How would you suggest we get there?
I would suggest that you search for an experienced firm that does employee engagement surveys. They will not ask you for your input on what should be on the survey, because they usually have done a lot of research, and I would trust people who know what should be on those surveys. I think that's way in the weeds for a council to do. And you can ask them what's traditional for sharing with boards. I know a lot of those kinds of surveys, they'll give you a very high level, but they certainly, I think what you're looking for is kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Like if there's a trust issue, if there's a legal issue that we should be concerned about that we would never know about, I would probably ask one of those firms. I could look up, because I have several clients who use those, and then, like I said, they break it down into departments, and, again, there's always this careful thing about where's governance and where's management. And you have a duty to find out, to the best of your ability, are things running smoothly? And Aaron has, to the best of his ability, make sure things run smoothly, right? And you have the oversight role. So I would talk to a firm that does employee engagement and say, here are some of the things that we want to make sure it gets covered. How do you do that? But I have seen those kinds of questions on employee engagement surveys. Just, I would beware of, just because I have books on 360s that are like this big of people who've done, statistical analysis, and they've cross-matched it, and, they've done all this stuff. And so they do that with employee engagement as well, because they're, again, looking at how does it correlate with productivity. So that would be my recommendation, is that you talk to one of those surveys and companies. They do this all the time. Like I said, the hospitals do them. I don't know if do schools do that? They probably do. But Fortune 500s all do that. Lots of private companies do that. It's out there.
Joel?
So I was wondering along with that, if we're going to go to that effort, including the council in that evaluation as well. Have you ever seen that done in terms of the board? Or is that something that we just need to stay away from in your professional opinion? And I respect you being here.
I would, those are very separate. If somebody is an employee, I would keep that very separate. What boards do is they do their own self-evaluation, and they look at elements, of trust and communication and decision-making ability and preparation, and are we getting information on time, and are we meeting often enough, and all of those kinds of things. And those can be great learning tools. And that can be something that you guys do in executive session. That doesn't have to be anything public. It's just sort of like, let's take a pulse. How are we doing ourselves?
Sure.
So.
But I think that's important. Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? DJ?
I do have a question. So, as you mentioned, this is kind of getting into the weeds here about looking into employee evaluations and trying to peek past the threshold of council's authority into the employment of the organization, whereas Aaron is the only employee of council. And I think we need to tread cautiously in the purpose by which we're doing this, because it's not our job, dictated by the charter, to look into employees past Aaron. And I can see that there is some appropriateness to doing this and holding the line of council's responsibility, but I can definitely see an opportunity for council to overstep their authority in looking into the greater employment of the organization. And so that is a question / comment. Of course, the question being, what do you think about that? Aaron, what do you think about that? But general comment of concern.
I think I've seen more problems when things got in, when there was blurring of lines than I have when there wasn't. Now, if you're concerned about, reporting, and this has been a big issue for people, do people feel like, do they know that they have someone to go to if they expect fraud, harassment, you name it, discrimination? Is that clear? Because that's a policy, right? And, those things can be done at a policy level, like, we don't discriminate, et cetera. We want to make sure our employees know where they can go. But I think things start to crumble when, when you lose the governance role, right? Main role in governance: oversight, insight, and foresight, right? That's your role, right? Operations, management, that would be management's role and the CEO's role. And so I think I've seen more trust eroded and dysfunctional organizations when that was overstepped than I have the other direction. Assuming you've got your backstops for any kind of serious egregious issue taken care of.
It's hard to make that assumption when the council doesn't know, maybe.
Yeah, but there's that's one of the things I'm listening to. It's like there are opportunities here for increased communication about some of those things, right? That's one of the takeaways of this conversation. Oh, we don't actually know that. Well, how could we get that information? Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that may not be obvious to probably anyone in the room, but so one of the reasons in, I think it was 2012, that I was so adamant about changing about the city attorney hiring and firing responsibilities was for this exact reason. Because right now, the way we had it years ago, we went through 5 city attorneys in 6 months, and the council never got one word of explanation about any of it. Now, if the manager wanted to fire a city attorney, would have to at least, with the permission or whatever of the council, I forget the exact wording, would at least have to give the council an explanation. And so my thinking at that time was, and what I explained to the Charter Task Force, is that if employees had a problem with the manager hopefully or theoretically, they could go to the city attorney, a major problem, harassment issue or things of that nature. They could go to the city attorney, and that could potentially be a channel, that would be safe for an employee. And I would hope that our city attorney would take that responsibility really seriously and understand that. But that's exactly why we changed it, 10 years ago, because there really was, I didn't think, a way for it. It was essentially, the city attorney needed to be able to be more independent of the manager, and that's why it was changed. So we do have a little bit of that now, of someone being able to go to the attorney, and the attorney has some degree of safety knowing that the manager just can't dismiss them with no explanation.
So that's part of the city attorney's obligation anyhow in the first place, however the charter reads. And the example that Councilor Pell was talking about with the lack of communication between the city manager and council was before my time, and it was not this city manager that's sitting here. With regards to responding to Councilor Fazier's question on appropriateness and getting into the weeds of things and stuff, and focusing on, say, for instance, in an employee engagement or satisfaction survey, I think is a good tool. It's a good tool for the organization. We like that. And it could provide good information for you to provide insight to the general health and well-being of the organization to get that. But to get the full details, I think, is something that we need to discuss from a standpoint of expectations. If you're getting feedback from an individual and you're seeing individual feedbacks without commonalities being defined or strengths and weaknesses being defined, I think that that's a level that council as a policy board could and should hear from that. The specifics of every comment within an employee satisfaction or engagement may not be appropriate. It may be too much in the weeds because it could bring up something that sounds glaring, but I can't respond to that because of personnel rules and regulations to tell you really why this response was given. And so it doesn't provide an opportunity for equal information to be shared. So I think from a standpoint of level of information, I think that would be an important piece, but I think really getting a general idea of the commonalities, how the organization's functioning, maybe even departments and divisions in general is a good place for council feedback.
Yeah, I guess I don't get the sense that the council wants to get into the weeds of individual responses and things like that. I think a high-level overview, it's the not getting it is perhaps causing some trust issues. And so I think, yeah, letting us know at a high level if employees are happy with their jobs, if they feel they're adequately compensated, if they, even among the managers, how they feel their interactions are, I think would be a good first step.
We can certainly do that and put that together, at least initially, with the first satisfaction survey that we have, so you can take a look at that.
Brian?
I think that would be a good start. I think to get the most clear picture, I would be most comfortable with a third party that it is their profession to implement these surveys and to, package the information in a way where council doesn't need to get in the weeds. Like, that's their job. So that's the goal that I think I would like to work towards. Before today, I thought it was a 360 review. Now it sounds like it's a survey from a third party that knows what they're doing. So that's where I would want this to go.
Council, does that make sense, along with simultaneously doing a subcommittee to evaluate the managers, the questions on the review process? Because I think it sounds like we may have to consider adding an NA and or changing some questions. Aaron, did you have a comment?
I was just, you're doing exactly, I was just going to try to facilitate some decision making, and you're right there. So, okay. And then also I was going to mention that I could be working with Cynthia to come up with maybe some potential consultants that would look at the satisfaction engagement type of tool.
Does that satisfy the need we have? Yes? Okay. I know this was an issue that Rob was bringing to our attention, so I want to make sure that that I'm not overstepping there. Okay. So yes, if we could look into a third-party engagement survey along with maybe what you already have, and then a subcommittee to look at those evaluation questions, I think we'd be happy. All right, thank you so much for being here today and helping us understand some of the language here and what it is that we're looking for.
Sure, thanks very much, and I really appreciate your diligence. It was very impressive. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next up, we are going to switch gears and go into zoning transition overlay, and it looks like Brad is handing out some slides for you.
Yeah, while I'm pulling this up, I just apologize that we didn't get those. We had a printer issue earlier, and so we also have the park ones coming as well. You'll notice that what's being handed out there, there's an August 29th presentation, which Councilor DeLaGrange asked to accompany this. So we're not going to be doing the August 29th presentation again, obviously, but there is a lot of data in there, some tables that might help you as we're working through that you can reference. So thanks to Councilor DeLaGrange for that idea. And then the other packet, most of it's the same except for the middle. As I was thinking about it this weekend, I got to thinking that table that we had in there about the responses from the zoning transition overlay people might not have been terribly helpful unless you really know your address as well. So I went ahead and just inserted slides that show the aerials of those locations, and so that's the main difference in the packet that you have in front of you from what you received over the weekend or on Friday. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I thought it might help to orient you. Let's see. Thank you, Jason. So the main subject and summary here, we're going to review some property owner feedback that we received related to a potential repeal of the zoning transition overlay, and then have a brief discussion about some of the next steps around the middle housing code update. We do have with us today several folks from the development community. I just wanted to mention that. The newly kind of formed Home Builders Association. So to remind the council, the zoning transition overlay really was driven by a state requirement back in 2013, 2014, when the city was looking at its urban growth boundary and where the expansion of that urban growth boundary would be, whether or not we could reach those 20-year supply housing targets. Since the thought at the time was that the land that was being added to the UGB at the time would not be sufficient, we looked internal to the city and what areas could be upzoned. So that's really where the kind of the driving force behind why it started. Here is the high-level overview of the areas. There's about 405 acres, 742 tax lots are impacted. You can see they're kind of spread around, several on the north part of the river, a higher acreage amount on the south side of the river. So the way that the ordinance is written right now in Article 13, it's set up with these two phases. Phase 1, which was November 14 to November 20, was basically set up the comprehensive plan designations, so that long-range designation was created then. There was no change to the actual zoning, so that zoning transition overlay, they kept their base zoning at the time. But it did give an owner the option to go to the higher zone, to the higher density, subject to a traffic analysis. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 was set up to kick in when the city adopted its transportation system plan, and that happened in October of 2020. The overlay zoning at that time became the new base zone. So the old zone was repealed, the new zone in those areas in that map I just showed you came into effect. There were approximately 348 acres that moved from the legacy zoning, which allowed single-family zoning uses, to a new zone that mandated the multifamily and prohibited single-family. So not all of the acres did that, but a big chunk. And here's an overview from the original zoning transition overlay. The main ones I wanted to call your attention to, this area from MR to HRR, those are the comp plan designations. So you can see there was 105.89 acres in there with 213 tax lots that went from R2 to R32. And the second one I wanted to note was the R3 to R42. That's 175 acres. So just between those two categories, that's almost 2/3 of all of the acres that we're talking about, which again, we're talking about the R3 and the R4. I point that out because, as you know, those are the two zones that our minimum density ordinance, which you adopted about 1.5 years ago, applies to those two zones. So the R3 and the R4 require 60% minimum density under that minimum density ordinance. That was not the case, of course, when this overlay was created. There was not a minimum density requirement, so that's a big difference. Couple of key dates. Yes, it looks like it did. I'm sorry, Joel. 5, I think.
I had paid. It was on the one that's vertical. I have number 11. Can anyone tell if Rick is still on the meeting? Okay. Oh, yeah.
We good?
Okay. Rick said he could see us again.
You're loud and clear.
Okay, thank you, Rick. We should be good then. And council, if you're looking for the right slide, it's in the vertical handout. I think we were on slide 11, Development Code Article 13.
You said 11, Mayor?
I believe so. Might have been one past that.
Okay. Yeah, they might be numbered differently, but
I think we're on the horizontal
This is-
presentation, actually,
Oh, is that right?
aren't we?
yeah, there's a couple of repeats. The
Oh.
cover sheet on the one should have today's date on it. And then I think the vertical one, the cover sheet, it should be.
Okay, the vertical one is old, so we are on the horizontal sheet. Slide,
Horizontal, and we
They
should
don't have
be
numbers on
Slide
ours.
7?
it doesn't have numbers on it.
Got the one with the background?
I have the right one, yeah, it's the first page after the chart, if anybody's looking.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Technology. I'll just keep moving on then. I see we get a couple counselors still out, but unless you want, Mayor, do you want to proceed?
Yeah, go ahead.
So after those 2 July memos that we sent out, you held your workshop on August 29th. And that's when we kind of gave the overview of all of the data, talked about next steps, and there was direction given that we send out a letter to all of the owners. So that was done October 25th. There was a letter sent to all 742 tax parcels. The letter that we sent was in your PDF that was sent out on Friday. So that letter gave folks 2 options. Option A was the default option where it didn't require any action, and that's where the zoning would revert back to what it was before October 2020 when the TSP was adopted. We did include in that letter a list of 27 subdivisions to kind of help folks, not that everybody knows the subdivision name that they live in, but maybe they would recognize that just kind of off the cuff, if they saw their subdivision name, they would say, okay, no action needed, I don't need to contact the city. And that is the vast majority of the properties already either platted for a single family house or already built out as a single family house or in the process of platting for single family housing. The option B did request an action from the property owner, and it said that the zoning transition overlay higher density zoning could be retained. We got about 40 responses to the 742 mailers. That included calls, front counter visits, emails, hard copy letters. We did get 19 letters returned to us. Several of them just were unavailable, but 6 of them did have forwarding addresses, so we resent those out. Of the direct responses that we received, there was 11 owners that totaled about 20 acres that asked to retain the zoning transition overlay zoning. 7 owners asked to revert to the original zoning. There were 5 instances where we did have owners contact us. They just said, what does this mean? Can you give me more information? I may get back to you. We didn't hear back from those 5 individuals. Those folks lived on Carnahan, Clover Lawn, New Hope, Lincoln, and Williams Highway. So here's a high-level summary of the responses. The top of the chart here, retain the zoning transition overlay zone, retain the higher density. Those are the 11 that we received. And then the bottom of the table is those that asked to revert to the original zone. We included a table that's not shown on the slides here, but was in your information sent on Friday that had some of the specific details about Yonser Enterprises, Northridge Enterprise, and Rose Butte, all owned by the same party. They asked for all of those to revert to the original zone. Grant Yonser did send in one letter representing the position there. So what I was going to do was, just so you're clear on where these are, just kind of do a quick tour across these so you can kind of get a better sense. First of all, those that we wanted to retain the overlay zone. So these are all going to be shown at the top of these slides. You'll see a summary what the current zoning is, and when we say revert, that's what it would revert back to, and that's what it was before 2020. And then the second line in the header is the zoning transition overlay zone. That's what it became in October of 2020. So this one is 2600 New Hope. It's the middle lot here. This is the only response that we had that was in the general commercial area. They wanted to retain that designation of GC2. The 2 property owners on either side, 2628 and 2576 Williams Highway, we did not get replies from. One of the principles that we're looking at here is for the most part, to avoid spot zoning. So we really prefer not to have a zone that is, a parcel that is zoned something quite differently from what its adjacent parcels are. So in this case, that would happen if we only rezoned the middle parcel there and did not rezone the others. I'm sorry?
Can you please turn on your mic?
Isn't that a church right there?
There is a church there.
Yeah, okay.
The second one, this is 2381 Williams Highway. This is currently R18. All this block of red would go to R42. This one is underdeveloped. It's got an opportunity for infill kind of along the west and south portions of the lot. The lot to the north was already platted out as Cedarwood Estates subdivision. Doesn't show the plat there, but you can see the addresses. So that's already platted out as single-family lots. So what they're asking for is for this one to retain the R42. The Jehovah's Witness Church is across the street. This lot is large enough really to provide a transition between the single family that's here to the south and the single family that's to the north with some of what other things that are going on. But we can come back to that. 2075 Williams Highway, this was the other one on Williams that we got. This is the northernmost lot. Harbeck is just to the north of this. The green across the street is shown as general commercial. This one is asking to retain the R42. Heading over on the south side of the river, the Redwood Avenue block. And again, just to remind you that the table that you received, this is going in the order of what that table is from top to bottom. So this is Redwood Avenue, kind of runs along the center of this slide. So the western, just about the western third of what's shown to go to R32 are all owned by the same party. And all of those, they're requesting to retain that higher density zoning there. You'll see in a minute, we did receive a request from the one immediately adjacent to stay at the R2. Leonard Road, 2590, 2596. So in this case, it's a combined about 2.5 acres. The star is shown on both of those. I don't know why this bottom one didn't go dark, sorry about that. But the owner did express a potential subdivision on these properties. Blackberry subdivision is right across Leonard there on the south side. Staying on Leonard Road, 2887 Leonard. This is near Arch Court. On the south side, most of what you see on the south side there was platted as South River Meadows, and that's being built out right now. And South River Meadows actually requires the R2. They came in with 5,000 square foot lots on that subdivision. And you can only do the 5,000 square foot lots in the R2 zone. So this would basically be consistent with that. The property owner to the west, we did not receive a reply from. But everything else on this side, not including Arch Court, if that was to stay R2, again, this would likely need to stay R2 to avoid spot zoning, the one to the west. And then moving up to the north part of town, we have 1387 Northeast 9th Street. This is just north of Steiger. Steiger runs here to the south, and then 9th Street runs north and south. There's kind of an even mix of built out and vacant in this lot. There's 3 parcels that are all kind of rectangular in shape there on the east side of 9th Street, all owned by the same property owner. 2 of them are vacant. We did not hear from anyone else in this particular block, but the owner of 1387 Northeast 9th Street did submit a letter and asked to retain the R2 zoning. And then going over towards the Winco area, this is Northeast D Street. Terry Lane is the one that runs north-south on the right side of the screen. D Street runs across the north. You may recognize the large 3 parcels there. Those are actually added to the urban renewal area. They did ask to retain that R4 zoning, as well as the property owner further to the west. They also asked to retain the R42 zoning there. And then on Northeast Fairview, directly north of Winco, we received a letter asking to retain the R42 zoning, in that there's 2 parcels that are right adjacent to each other, owned by the same property owner. We did not receive replies from anyone else in this block. This block is probably, I'm guessing, 70% built out. Most of the opportunity for any higher density development in this block is going to be kind of, on the north sides of these lots, where they're vacant and they're large backyards. And then finally, we have 1564 Carnahan Drive. This is Rogue River Highway running along the north side, and then Carnahan running north-south. The purple across the street is a general commercial. And then all of the blue in the R2 zoning that's in the UGB, but is not annexed. So this red line actually shows the city limits line. So everything on the west side of that and kind of heading south is in the urban growth boundary, but has not been annexed. We did hear from 1654 Carnahan as well, which is further south, and I'll show you that in a minute. They actually requested to go back to the original zoning. So here's the few in that category that we received. 7 letters, as I mentioned, one of them from owner who has multiple property owners here. This is Capitol Hill subdivision over just before the curve turning into Upper River Road. So this is subdivision platted as single family. Most of these are built out already as single family. So it really makes a lot of sense to keep the R18 out there. 1396 Radine Drive. This is currently R18. It would go to R2 zoning under the zoning transition overlay. It's about a 4.2 acre parcel. I think it has a single family dwelling on it now. We just a minute ago looked at South River Meadows, and that's touches this kitty corner to the upper, to the northwest. That one has to be R2. Most everything around this is R18 today. And that's what they're proposing to stay as. And then 2175 North Star. This is another one that we looked at a minute ago, where the property owner in this block wants to retain some of these. This one is about a 2 acre parcel. So it would only apply to the R3 and R4. If it reverted to the R2 zone, the minimum density wouldn't apply. That's probably the biggest impact here, because from a land use standpoint, the difference between the R2 and the R3 too is very minimal. You can do multifamily in them. The main difference is in the R2, you have to go to the hearings officer if you want to do apartments. If you want to do apartments in the R3, you can just come in and get your permit. You don't go through staff. You don't have to go through a hearing. Let's see, 2729 Southwest Elmer Nelson. This is Summerfield Estates subdivision, all largely built out. Moving over to Lincoln Road area. This is south of G Street. And Bridge actually runs right here at the bottom of the screen. That's the corner of Bridge and Lincoln. So there is the semi-industrial use there now, but then you have the vacant properties that are to the north of that. And then we also, this is a different owner on the west side of Lincoln. Both of those starred properties, they asked to stay at the R2 zoning. 1460 Fruitdale Drive. This is near Hamilton, right near the intersection of Hamilton and Fruitdale. This is one lot in from that intersection to the west. It's about 0.6 acre. It's got a single family residential today. It's adjacent to a church. Again, asking to keep the R2 zoning. And then out on Williams Highway, this is also on the east side of Williams. This is asking to retain the R18 zone there. So those are the main ones that we received. There's two smaller ones that were below, I think, 0.2 acres that were already built out and made sense to keep that lower zone. I did not put those on there. I already made reference to this one earlier. So South River Meadows subdivision, we did not receive any information to the letter from Michael Masters. That was platted after October 2020, so he was able to use the R2 zone, which he did, and that's the 5,000 square foot lots. So even though they didn't apply, in order to keep that conforming, they would have to stay at the R2. I threw this slide in there just so you could kind of see where the minimum density code, where the impacted areas are for the R3 zones and the R4 zones. A lot of overlapping, as we talked about earlier. That was in an earlier presentation. So some staff observations, recommendations. So we need to accommodate about 550 new multifamily residential units according to our housing needs analysis in the next 20 years. So it doesn't factor in market supply gaps, but if you look at kind of the estimated number of acres that would be needed to build that out, we're looking at about 48 to 50 acres, assuming that density of 11.4, which is low, because for a multifamily unit such as the one that's being built right now out on Harbeck, Cathedral Square, that comes in around 20. So that's a little bit more than, well, almost double what the density is if you factor this in for what the amount of land we would need. So I guess the bottom line there is that if you, without the zoning transition overlay and without those additional acres that are brought in under the overlay, we think that we can reach our target in terms of acreage for multifamily. Could we get more by adding it? Yeah, I think, we could. So based on the owner feedback, it looks like most of those 11 tax lots that are asking for that zoning transition overlay zone to be kept could be accommodated. And as I just mentioned, our position is that a repeal of the zoning transition overlay and reverting to the pre-2020 would not have a significant impact on our ability as a city to reach our target multifamily goals. So really quickly, the middle housing code update. So this was put on hold essentially at your hearing in June. We did not receive any public comments directly related to that middle housing code at that hearing. They were all related to the zoning transition overlay. Since July 1st, we've been administering the state's middle housing code. So it has a lot of the same requirements that our city ordinance does, but ours is much preferable just because it's tied into our zoning matrix and our zoning rules, much easier to enforce, easier to understand. So In order to help kind of move that forward, depending on what your conversation is today, the staff's recommendation is that we just, we reset the hearing for the middle housing code update itself, which would be renoticed, but it would not necessarily go back to the Planning Commission unless you really wanted to. There weren't any significant changes in the middle housing code between now and when you had your hearing in June, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of it to you. So, so the call to action, there's a couple options there. The October 2022 property owner letter did state that a second mailing would take place. We put those two options before folks. They came in with either option A or option B. Like any mailer, like any survey, you hope for more. We did not get, of the 742, 40 responses. So there's a lot of folks, either, number one, they didn't have to get back to us if they already had single-family housing. But we do think that, a second mailer to sort of just update on where the council is at after the workshop would be helpful. So in talking to Augustus in terms of the ease of moving this thing forward, because the zoning has already changed, all of those single-family houses, that's over 600 properties, from what we heard at your last hearing, or at your last workshop, and what we heard from other folks who came in and talked to us is that, yeah, we want to keep that. But the technical issue here is that they would actually need to be rezoned back to their original single-family zoning, if that makes sense. So if we repeal the entire thing, take the zoning transition overlay off the books altogether and just have everything go back to that zoning that was before 2022, and then just work with these 11 property owners that specifically said, yes, we want to keep the higher density zoning. That we think, at least from staff perspective, would be the cleanest, it would be the simplest, and would help to avoid a lot of confusion, and it would honor the mailer that we sent out and the process that's already kind of been started. So we would essentially have an ordinance that would take everything back to the original zoning, but work with those property owners that I mentioned at the beginning, the 11, and to keep the higher density zoning that they are asking for. And we would work just with those folks, and everyone else, there would really be no need to have any signatures or get any consent because they would revert back. So there's a lot there. We recognize we're trying to unravel kind of a very complex code that was adopted almost 10 years ago, and try to get us back to a cleaner slate to work with.
Thank you. Questions? I have Dwayne, then Vanessa, and then Rob. Well, I'm not really sure what our plan was regarding that, but let's ask questions of Brad right now. Did you have a question for Brad? Okay, Vanessa.
In a memo that we received, the LCD gave a recommendation to rely on the H&A for our 20-year housing supply needs. And I wanted to know, did the H&A utilize the base zoning, the pre-zoning, or the ZTO for their analysis? The housing needs analysis?
They did use the zoning transition overlay, but when they're looking at the projected number of houses, they really weren't looking at what could be built. They were just looking at what would be needed based on the census and Portland State University projections, if that makes sense. So they did consider that, but it wasn't a huge influencer in terms of the end numbers that were in that report.
Is it possible that with a repeal of the ZTO that we could potentially be in a deficit of buildable land based on the H&A?
We don't think so because of the middle housing code requirements and the minimum density.
Thank you.
Rob?
So Brad, when you say that the city would be able to work with the 11 property owners that want to retain the higher density potentials, what do you mean by work with? What exactly does that look like?
So what I meant by that is if they have already received today the higher density zoning, but if you repeal it, that's going to go back. And so by work with, we're saying instead of them having to file a rezone application with the city, we would do that just as a blanket, single application that would retain the zoning transition overlay zoning where it is today. So it would, instead of them having to go through, which they would normally have to do a case-by-case application, rezone every one parcel by parcel, we would just do a single application that would do them all.
Brian?
I'm a little bit confused. Thank you for the presentation. I'm a little confused on the background slide. It says August 29th at our workshop, council motion to proceed with a notice to ZTO property owners, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't my recollection, and I went back and I watched the meeting, and council actually motioned to take this topic to a business meeting to receive public comment and to make a decision. There was nothing decided as far as sending a notice or how to structure the notice. So I was just a little bit confused on that piece because I thought we were probably going to have a little bit more discussion before sending the notice out, but now I'm learning that that's all been done already. So I'm just wondering why that is inconsistent with what I saw in the video.
The inconsistency being the business meeting as compared to the mailer.
Right.
Yeah. I guess I don't have a great answer for you. I'd have to go back and look. I do know that we had quite a bit of conversation at staff level about, well, how are we going to bring to you? Because it seemed pretty clear that you wanted to hear from the owners and where were they in terms of, since they didn't receive a direct mailer in 2020, that we wanted to hear from them, and that the information that you would be basing your business meeting discussion on would be much more informed if you knew where the property owners stood.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a second question. I'm just trying to wrap my head around why staff is recommending a full repeal of the ZTO.
Yeah. No, it's a good point because you know, there's numerous of this 405 acres where it makes a lot of sense to either as transitioning zoning or blocks of acreage that has good opportunity for infill at more than single family housing. I think the main reason that we're recommending it is, well, besides the fact that we have minimum density now, and we think that that's about 62% of all of that ZTO land is covered under the minimum density now, but also it's ease of communication with the public because of the way that this was adopted and the fact that the zoning actually kicked in without any public hearing, for us to try to go back and piecemeal that and pick some that are going to stay and some that are not, in terms of how we run that through the public hearing process, I think could be quite cumbersome. And that's why we're suggesting that if we just take the whole thing off the books and start by working with the ones that we know want to have the higher density, that we're going to be able to move ahead pretty quickly with those because we already know their intent. And we know what the city's intent was. So, you know, we could certainly go back and work with the other property owners that have really strategic pieces that are at the higher density zoning. But for right now, we just thought that it would be cleaner to proceed with the repeal and take it off the books so that people don't get confused about the options there.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Could the city have structured the letter in a way where the party to take action was the ones that wanted to revert zoning? And so then this would have been flipped the other way where we were just down zoning those properties that wanted to be down zoned, and then the bulk of the properties remained in the overlay? Is that?
We could have.
Okay.
We could have. We understood from the council's last workshop that there was more consensus going the other way. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that's what we heard. So that the majority of the property owners would have no action required.
Okay, thanks.
Rick has a question, then Vanessa, then DJ.
So Brad, is it accurate to say if we did nothing right now, the individuals that want to revert back would have to file separate applications and pay fees for the zone change?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I agree. I like the approach that you're using and I would be fully supportive of that to remove the entire ordinance and start from scratch like you're suggesting. Thank you.
Vanessa?
You had made a comment about how 62% of the ZTO is currently covered by minimum density. On slide 5, I do see that 105 acres would revert from R3 to R2. At that point, wouldn't they fall out of regulation under minimum density, being an R2 zone?
Am I on the right slide?
Correct, yeah, from MR to HR, 105 acres. So if they reverted back from R3 to R2, they would fall outside of that scope, correct, for minimum density requirements?
That is correct.
Okay.
The properties, right, that would go back to the R2, correct, yep.
Okay, thank you.
DJ?
Sure, yeah, this has been identified as a Home Builders Association, one of their goals. We can expect to hear from them shortly, but there's a missing piece from your presentation I was anticipating you talking about, and if you were prepared to talk about it, that'd be great. We have an issue of non-conforming use in single-family utilization in the zoning transition overlay areas. Can you talk about that, please?
Can you explain, when you say non-conforming use?
Yeah, you have an overlay zone that's now R2, but you're built out in R1, have subdivisions actively building R1 in those transition overlay zones that then, if they are to proceed, as I understand it, would be labeled as non-conforming use in the transition overlay zones.
And that would be the case if we didn't take any action. But the recommendation and what was also in the letter was that if you were already, you had an application for a single-family plat that was going through the process, that those would be lumped in with the rest of the single-family existing. So there would no longer be a non-conforming situation.
Okay.
Any other questions? Joel?
So I'm not the smartest kid on the block on this topic. I just want to check with you to see if my assessment of it's correct. So what you're saying is if we discard the overlay, and then on the 11 properties where the owners want the increased density, we go ahead and do an action that would allow the increased density, that we would satisfy the amount of housing units if it was built out that we projected.
Well, to say that we would satisfy the number of housing units. If those were built out, of course, not just those, but because we also have quite a bit of other multifamily housing, our multifamily zones that is not under the zoning transition overlay.
Sure, sure.
You know, there's R4, there's R5, there's other vacant general commercial, for example. General commercial allows for apartments. So when you take all that together,
So then this also takes into account then the change from the state level in terms of zoning requirements for housing that increases density as well, is that correct?
yes, yes. You know, we don't have any projections about the number of units that are going to be built under House Bill 2001. I mean, that's, nobody has that crystal ball. But it certainly lays the framework that would allow for higher density, because it allows for up to fourplexes in those single-family zones.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Vanessa?
I'm still trying to understand this. I'm circling back to my first question that I had on DLCD's recommendation to rely on the housing needs analysis, buildable land inventory. My concern comes from two parts in that, and I'm trying to see how I can form this into a question, but I'm trying to work it out loud here with you. The BLI H&A utilizes the ZTO zoning, and it also doesn't consider the deficit that we're currently in for housing. So with those two factors, with the deficit being excluded and a repeal of the ZTO zoning that it utilized to come to that conclusion, are we certain that we would have sufficient BLI for the needs of the community if we did repeal the ZTO and we're not including the deficit as well?
Yes, I mean, the deficit, in my mind, kind of has to be set aside because that's the case either way. I mean, the deficit wasn't considered in the housing needs analysis, and it wasn't considered in the zoning transition overlay. You know, it kind of underlies everything. So it sort of is a wash, I guess, in terms of calculating what our target is for a 20-year land supply for housing. But if on your first part of your question, yes, we did look at that, and if you take the zones that are going to transition out of the lower density, I mean, if you factor those out at the higher density that's there, either the R3 or the R4, and show them going back, that with the rest of the multifamily zoning that we have, that is outside the zoning transition overlay, as well as the ones that are going to stay that are in the zoning transition overlay, we would still meet that 38 acres. Or I'm sorry, 48 acres, which is what we need to build out at our 550 units.
Okay, but the ZTO came into play in 2014 because what we had at that time wasn't sufficient? But you're saying that if we did revert back to that number in 2014, it would be sufficient?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
We have had some new property that was zoned for multifamily since that time, such as Harbeck and Allen Creek, and a couple of others that, you know, upzoned since 2014.
Well, in the middle housing, as you mentioned, was one of the things that wasn't in play at 2014 when the overlay was first looked at, which was a game changer for that.
Right.
Are there other questions? All right, Dwayne, you had requested a comment, and we don't usually allow public comments during workshops. It's a key difference between workshops and the business meetings, but we do sometimes. It's usually nice to have it prior arranged. We do it especially with our city committees and sometimes consultants to provide input, but do you want to ask the council if they'd be willing to entertain that?
This was prior arranged. It was asked at the last workshop that they be invited and be expected to speak. So this is already done. He's sitting here waiting with that expectation.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good to remind me of these things before, since I'm running the meeting. What, who do we have and who are they representing? Okay. I have no idea what anybody was told, so.
Thank you. I appreciate the time to speak today. Justin Gerlitz Engineering, also part of the Home Builders Association. I wanted to just provide additional input. One of the main reasons I wanted to speak today to help with this discussion is I have been actively using the new middle housing code and applying it to local projects in our community, and I'm finding some drastic improvements with that code in place now on where we can create density. Just to back up for a second though, one of the biggest reasons that this came to our attention as the home builders was the non-conforming use. There was concerns across the board, but one of the main things that occurred is, for instance, I own a house in a subdivision that was recently constructed that would essentially be non-conforming now. And the lots within those subdivisions that both projects that we had under construction, clients of mine had under construction and had been recently completed, effectively could not, per the letter of the code today with zoning transition in place, build a single family home. So we had constructed all these homes, we had constructed lots, built lots with subdivisions, and on its face, we couldn't go in and apply for a single family building permit. Nor the way the code is worded, couldn't even enclose a patio on our property or expand a bathroom or a bedroom. So that was really one of the biggest red flags that came up when that ZTO came into effect. The other thing too is it kind of just silently came into effect. There was no notice, nobody knew about it. I only found out about it, I think I was the first to find out about it when I did a pre-application on a project. And this was a year after it effectively went into effect, just because I hadn't submitted a project during that time. So that's why it came out. But back to what we're finding with middle housing, which I think is very significant to the discussion, is middle housing now is allowing us to do up to a fourplex on any residential lot in any residential zone. It's allowing us to do townhomes with no density limitations. It's allowing us to do duplexes with no density limitations. So just to put that in perspective for some projects that I currently have working on right now, I have a project I'm looking at on Fairview. It's been evaluated multiple times for a small apartment complex. Every time we've done it, we haven't been able to make it work with open space requirements, ADA parking, things like that. Now we're looking at developing it as clusters of fourplexes, and it actually looks like it's probably going to work. So, what was going to be 26, 27 units, now we can actually physically do with 22 units as fourplexes on their own independent lots because of the requirements are so less. I've got another project that's kind of been in the books for a long time. It's a subdivision out off of Grandview. It's in for pre-app right now. And it, with the zoning, with the middle housing standards, what was going to be, I think we have 20-something lots of single family only because it's an R1 zone. Now the developer wants to do duplexes on the same size lots. Actually, so we're effectively doubling our density in this project that all this time was going to be single family. And then I've got several other smaller projects, and these are the ones I'm starting to see more commonly in Grants Pass because we have all these infill lots in Grants Pass. We don't have these massive tracts of land. And we're finding ourselves able to do several fourplexes clustered next to each other on lots that really were only big enough for, say, a duplex to start with. And I've got 3 of those projects in the books right now where we're adding 16 units on one piece of a lot, 16 units on another lot. So very, very quickly, I'm seeing the middle housing, the reason for the middle housing, this all came from the state, and how it applies to our community and how it is increasing density drastically on this is very quick, this is the last 6 months. So when it comes to Councilor Ogier, you're asking questions about taking away some of this land. Middle housing effectively is putting it right back into play, and I think it's actually in the long term going to put more density in play and also allow the flexibility that's needed for the individual property owner, developer, or builder. Because as we know, everybody has their own business model, investment model. A lot of people, small investors might want to build a duplex. A big investor might want to build fourplexes or an apartment, whereas other people that have purchased these lands for home construction, they're building, their model of their business is to build and sell homes. That doesn't go along the same lines as an apartment complex. So I just wanted to share that today. Hopefully that's helpful to the discussion, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Dwayne?
So would you say the Homeowners Builders Association is more getting rid of the CTO?
Yes, we've written in on it, but yes, we have, we're recommending to repeal it. Brad, I'm very happy with Brad's presentation. I thought that was, or at least to me, it was very informative to see all those areas. I like the option of giving people where it makes sense to keep that zoning. And if the city can help them with that I guess it would be a zone change at that point after this goes into effect. I like that flexibility. Again, I think flexibility is the most important tool we have to spur housing development, no matter what kind it is. And again, in combination with this middle housing standards, I think we can still accomplish the same goal, and probably even more so than we originally did.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Justin? All right, thanks
Thank you
for
for the
being here
time.
today. Brian has a question for Brad.
Yeah, sorry, I had one more follow-up question. And it goes back to the recommendation from staff to repeal the ZTO. Did staff receive any sort of feedback from the development community or from individuals saying that there may be some sort of threat of lawsuit if the ZTO is not repealed? Was this recommendation made under duress in any way?
We had numerous meetings or interactions with either Gail or Justin. And before those meetings, I had floated to Brad the possibility of pulling the ZTO, just pulling it completely. That was an idea that I called him with. So that came from me.
Why?
It was really a matter of trying to create a scenario that would be cleanest for everybody involved. So, as there is with land use in Oregon, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that require notice. Kind of taking a look at all of the facts, and remember, these all predate, this predates a lot of us here, what happened in 2014. Kind of looking at all the circumstances, it seemed that it might be cleaner at one point. I was sitting in my office thinking about this. It seemed that it might be cleaner to pull the ZTO, and then that's kind of where that started to develop. Okay, well, how are we going to deal with properties that might want to retain it? And we kind of had to build it out from there. And I think that I wouldn't say it was under duress, because we had a public meeting about it. You know, people came and they spoke about it. They voiced their opposition to it. It was really trying to figure out if there is a way that we could, as a city, try to do the best good for the most people, while at the same time staying within the spirit of what the ZTO had originally tried to accomplish.
And from our standpoint, I mean, we basically a bunch of nerdy planners sitting in a room looking at the numbers, honestly. I mean, we weren't under duress in terms of looking at that. We did receive one letter, and that was in your packet, November 3rd, Stephen Seiler, who, did state that, in my opinion, anything short of repeal would constitute an illegal zone change that I would take action to vigorously oppose. So in terms of written communication, that's as close as we got to someone referencing using legal action.
Okay, thank you. So just to be clear and just to make sure I have this question answered, staff did not receive any sort of written or verbal threat of lawsuit that was a factor in this recommendation?
No, it was not a factor in this recommendation.
And it was not received?
Can I say that it wasn't received? No, but I didn't feel as though that there was a real risk of that at that point in time.
Thanks.
All right, Rick has a question.
So Brad, what was the ballpark figure on the people that wanted to retain the old zoning? Was it like 12 or 20 or?
The ones that want to revert back, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yes.
We received 7 responses.
Okay, those are 7 responses, but you sent out 40 questionnaires, of which roughly about half came back, so you have, I want to say, a liability of half of those people still out there. So, I want to propose a joke for you. So, if those 7 people wanted to come in today, and you've already said that they would have to pay for the zone change application, the zone change fee, they would have to write their own report. So, how would you feel if the council wanted to retain the CTO and we have staff sitting around not doing anything? They could just write the 7 different zone change reports, right? And then the council could waive the fee? To me, I see that as a non-appropriate burden, and with the 20 people that are out there that may or may not be aware of their change, this could be an ongoing process, and I don't think it's fair for those people to have to incur their own zone change, and so that would be, which I realize we haven't received a lawsuit, but do you see there's the potential that those property owners would come in and ask for a waiver of the fee and writing the report?
Is that a potential? Yeah, I think it is a potential. I mean, we've communicated to them already in writing that their property has already been zoned to the higher density, and so there certainly is an expectation. But in terms of your question about that, was one of the things that we recommended earlier, was that we work closely with those property owners, and of course it wouldn't just be restricted to them. I mean, we could do a fairly global zone amendment application that would, we already have a lot of the detail that we would need already because of this process. So in terms of preparing a staff report, but you would still go through the public hearing process, and that would probably be the most time-consuming piece.
And what's a ballpark on a zone change fee for those individuals?
If there was, if someone came in the door today to do a zone map amendment, I'm looking over at Mark, I think it's in the maybe $1,200 to $1,300 range.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. You answered my question.
Okay.
DJ.
I think it's really important to note that in the letter sent out to some 742 parcels, that no response was required if you want to revert back to the old zone. So we really need to take these responses as we want to revert for what they are. Because if we're going to entertain that, we have to entertain the presumption that only 11 of 742 wanted the transition overlay, and the other ones, by not responding, could perhaps, in some proportion, have presumed that by a no response, it does mean that they would like to revert to the zoning prior to the overlay.
Right, it was an opt-out, right?
Yeah, and that came from the council discussion as well. Obviously, Augustus's work in the discussions too about how we could do this. In meetings in the Home Builders Association, et cetera, and looking at this, it became abundantly clear that the proportion of people in these areas were far fewer that wanted this overlay than did not want the overlay. And as Augustus mentioned, the cleanest, most efficient way to do this, it was council's presumption at that time would have been to provide the option for the overlay rather than the other way around. And I think that the data shows that the overwhelming majority of people want the old zoning.
Brian.
I'm going to try to keep it concise, but I have so much to say on this topic. First of all, the survey that staff decided to send out, that we had not yet decided to send out, was biased. It was not an evenly laid out survey. There was one option where people had to take action, and then there was another where people did not have to take action. And we all know with city surveys, we get a very low response rate. On this one, we got 5%. So to assume that 95% of the people would want to revert based on a 5% response rate and a survey that requires one group to take action and one group to not take action is totally inaccurate. That is not an appropriate data metric for a survey. It should have been either everyone, you send it, we need responses from both sides to have an accurate representation of what that sample group wants us to do. So I don't know that that survey is helpful for me. So it's really hard for me to know what to do based on the feedback that we've already gotten. And I'll stop there for now.
Vanessa, then Joel. Oh, I think we've moved beyond questions.
Okay. Yeah, reflecting on the South River Meadow subdivision, it was outlined that this is platted and currently being developed, and to avoid it being non-conforming, for this one single project, we've decided that they don't need to reply. Although this is a current project, they are active in our community. So I think that just goes to reinforce what Councillor DeLagrange had just said, that these are people that are active in the community and are developing. So it makes more sense to me to have an opt-out program rather than an opt-in program, especially with the low amount of responses that we've received. It doesn't make sense to allow zoning by citizenry. Zoning is done at a city level, so that is interesting to allow such a wide variety of opinion in our 20, 40-year housing need.
Joel.
So from my perspective, the opt-in is important. Those property owners that want to keep the transitional zone zoning. The state law gives us additional flexibility. And then the other thing is if there's another property owner that wants to go beyond the state law, we are open for that, and it might be a little more cumbersome, and we'll meet our goals. To say, that the survey was one way or the other, and we'd rather have it different, I'm about meeting the goals. And I think the strategy that's mapped out before us right now will be socially acceptable. Those people that want to retain that higher density will do so. If there's other people that want to increase the density, they got the state law. If they want to go beyond that, they can come back to the city, and it'll work. So I don't want to really hold it up. I think we need to go forward.
Dwayne.
Just to make sure, I do agree with a little bit of everybody, and I don't always agree with the state and their overreach, but it sounds like to me that the state has actually done a favor for us and be able to meet our goals by allowing us to do what Justin said, build things that before weren't available, which we've all said that we wanted more housing or whatever it is. So, I want more housing, so I feel, but there's also these people that don't want to change. So obviously I feel in the way that we're not going to penalize those people that want to stay at the ZTO either, and allow them to stay at that. And I don't know how you're going to do the other part, but I just would like to stick with more buildable housing. And if we can put more housing on properties now with the new state law, let's move forward with that and get rid of the ZTO. But I think we have to figure the other part out.
Valerie, then Vanessa.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that 11 people voted in and want to do the density. That tells me that people are listening out there and they're recognizing we need more housing. So I was very encouraged by seeing that. I have also said always that it is our local developers who are going to get us out of this housing crunch. And we have to listen to our local builders. And Justin represents our local builders, and the home being advantaged. I see that discouraging our local builders. I was excited to see Justin talk about how the people are saying, oh yeah, this is great, I can do a fourplex, I can do that. And so I think we just need to encourage that. And we've talked about incentivizing. We've always, that's what we're saying. Let's incentivize people to do more density. Let's not make them do more density, because all that does is create barriers in a sense. So I am in favor of removing the zoning overlay. I think there was not public hearing going forward, and you're just creating a monster that you don't want to deal with. That we will get to where we need to be, bringing in our local builders to help us get there.
Vanessa, then Rick, then Brian, then DJ.
Yeah, I had a question for the counselors that support a full repeal. I was hoping to do some brainstorming. How can we support a full repeal of the ZTO without penalizing landowners who did not respond to the survey? So has there been any consideration of a grace period? Maybe you have a year, 2 years if you weren't responsive to this survey letter, but perhaps in a year you wanted to build something high density, because we could see that there is an active subdivision that's technically non-conforming. So there's active people in the community that own these lots. How do we prevent from penalizing people who want to build higher density?
Rick? Oh, hang on just a second, Rick. Augustus.
So to respond to your point, Councilor Auger, I don't see any reason why there couldn't be some sort of grace period. I think it would be up to you as to the length, the amount of time you want to give for that grace period, but I don't see any reason why that would be improper. Yeah, this is a very difficult situation where we're assessing risk and we're assessing like what could and could not happen. This is a very novel legal issue that I have not been able to find an analog anywhere in state law. So that was part of I think the reason that staff was going in the direction of doing an opt-in rather than an opt-out. There just wasn't a real clear path that I could see that was like, well, this is exactly what we have to do in this circumstance. So I don't see any reason though why a grace period of some kind would be improper.
Rick?
So Brad, if the council wishes to go forward with the removal of the ZTO, is there anything stopping us to come back a month or 2 months from now and do a new one that includes only those people that have confirmed that they want the zone change?
No, there's no reason you couldn't do that. Our hope would be that that it could be done. Taking into consideration now all of the data and all of the mapping, all the information that we have, moving ahead. I think the nature of the wording in the ZTO ordinance itself was just very difficult to work with, and so I think that's again underscoring why we recommend the repeal is just the language. We can do better. So I guess my point is, yeah, we could do something moving ahead. And there's no time period, no required gap between when you would repeal and when you could initiate some kind of new zone map amendment process.
Okay, thank you.
Augustus?
To piggyback on that, that would give staff an opportunity to go through the proper noticing channels, and then there would be no question about that going forward. Because as we stated, this predated Brad and I, and so we would now, knowing what we know now, we'd be able to implement the proper noticing that would be required for such a change on a large scale.
Okay, I have Brian, then DJ, then Dwayne, then Rob. I know they're all like aggressively, like it doesn't help, guys.
So I know, we all know that we're still in a housing crisis. We haven't solved the housing crisis yet. We haven't even begun to solve the housing crisis yet, everybody. So that's number one. Number two is this zoning transition overlay. It technically isn't even an overlay anymore. This zoning is in effect. This zoning is finalized and in place. So in effect, we are doing a zoning repeal, and that zoning repeal has the potential to downzone up to 347 acres of land, which would include removing 142 acres from minimum density requirements. Both of those go starkly against our goal of housing and addressing the housing crisis. I have concerns that the staff recommendation partially came from motivation from a legal perspective and not necessarily from a housing goal perspective, based on what I've heard today. I do think that any property owner that would like to opt out of the ZTO should be able to do so. So any builder, any property owner that's in the ZTO, they should absolutely have the ability to opt out. That, I think we could probably all agree on that. Also just one last point. I know that we have a builder on council that builds low to medium density, and this decision does create more buildable land in the low and medium density category as opposed to the higher density. So I would consider maybe announcing a potential conflict of interest when we do vote. Thank you.
DJ.
Sure, yeah, I'm in favor of what's proposed from staff. Responding there to Vanessa, yeah, I think it would be prudent for us to have a grace period, be explicit in our notifications, et cetera. I think the cleanest way is to opt into the ZTO rather than out. There's going to be a lot more work involved with saying you want the old zoning than the new, and that's done by lots of conversations with developers. So I can rely on that as being a pretty firm opinion.
Dwayne.
I just wanted to, someone said, Vanessa said about non-conforming property. There's a lot of non-conforming property in this county. So the 80s were the big problem. We had properties that are half acres that are R5. So something being non-conforming doesn't really have an issue. I mean, you go down New Hope Road, most of those homes on New Hope Road are half acres. They're R2s or something like that. So the people that are already building, I don't think this is going to affect them at all. I mean, that just non-conforming is just a word that they use, but means zoning's been changed over time. There's a lot of different properties like that in this county that are zoned different now than they were before. So, but I do agree with her that I feel like people should have some kind of grace period, though. I really do. They should have an option. We shouldn't be forcing it on them. But I also want to allow them to maximize the amount of housing we're building. So I agree with DJ and Vanessa that there should be some kind of grace period and people should have the option to opt in or opt out. So,
Rob.
So a question I have about a grace period. If, an area is developed at a lower density, and then, a year or however long this grace period would be later, some people wanted to put in higher densities. Does that affect, the infrastructure that's in the ground? I mean, do we have, is there going to be capacity there for water and sewer? Or is that, I like the idea of a grace period on the surface, but then when you actually have to deal with that, is that practical? Maybe someone who's a builder could tell me that, but it almost seems like a mix and match spot density program might not even be possible if you're just going to put the infrastructure in once. Is there a builder or somebody that can comment?
All right. Rob was the last hand. Oh, go for it, Brad.
Well, I was just going to say that's a very, very difficult scenario, what you just painted, because, it's so neighborhood by neighborhood in terms of what's the diameter of the pipe size, what's the water pressure in that area. We have some low pressure zones, Jason can speak to that better. But so it would really take on it, going to each one of those zoning transition overlay neighborhood pockets and doing that analysis. But I can say that when they did the master sewer plan, the master water plan, the master stormwater plan, we checked with the engineers and the consulting firms who prepared those master plans, which looked at the build out of the entire urban growth boundary in terms of the infrastructure, and they did assume what the comprehensive plan designation was, not what the current zoning was. So I think we can be pretty confident in saying that there wouldn't be some crisis of infrastructure that would face us, with a building out at higher density in some of these other areas, because the engineers who did the infrastructure planning assumed the comprehensive plan designation in their analysis.
So I'm wondering, do we have one of those engineers in the room today? Would he like to comment on that? Is Justin qualified to comment on that, or?
It's up to the mayor. I mean, the engineers who did our master plans are not in the room, but.
Do you have an answer, Justin, that you would like to respond?
Yeah, if it's helpful to discussion. When it comes to infrastructure, the zoning transition overlay and the middle housing are just dispersing this residential development. And it kind of, like Brad said, the comprehensive plan, the zoning is residential or high residential, I believe. So when it comes to infrastructure, that's one of the biggest questions I have with the zoning transition overlay requiring multifamily housing on stuff that was set up for single family, because you need additional water services, you need additional power, gas services, cable services, all these things that were originally set up for a single family in that application. If you automatically say thou shalt develop a fourplex on this, and you have to, and you don't have the infrastructure, sometimes that's much more significant down the street versus just on your own individual parcel. I don't know if that helped answer that or not.
So when we're talking about a grace period, are we talking about for entire subdivisions? Are we talking about individual lots within a subdivision? What exactly are we talking about? Because again, what I guess I was in a certain sense asking the reverse of your answer. If you've got a situation where, just a few people or it's sporadic that people want to go with higher densities, but like you say, but it's been laid out. It's not mandated for the higher densities. In other words, we're not coming back as a city and saying, oh, this was laid out for, single family use. Now we're going to mandate higher, and obviously that may not work in many cases. But if there's a grace period involved and it's only some owners, or, does it still work? Could they, you understand what I mean? Or do we end up in problems again where we're going to be just confused again?
Well, typically the capacities of the water, the sewer, and the storm drain systems are such where they're not impacted by very small increases. And that's, of course, every application is different. That doesn't mean there's a street in our community that maybe already has an undersized water or sewer service, and additional homes don't help that, additional density. But, typically if we spot zoned, this is just my engineering speak here, if we spot zoned a few clusters of land as outlined on some of these things. One thing I did notice is most of those are located on highways, Redwood Avenue, they're close to the bigger infrastructure that we have in our community. And if we do some of these ones on the outskirts, say Leonard Road, for example, that was a couple of them popped up there. If you had a couple extra units on something that wanted to stay in the ZTO zone, I wouldn't anticipate that would impact the global capacity of the water and sewer systems that are out there, and the other utilities, franchise utilities.
All right, I think Val is next.
Yeah, I just have a question because, one of the things, this middle housing thing totally throws everything off, because it doesn't matter what kind of zoning, there is no single family housing zoning left with the middle housing code. You can always make it denser. Am I correct? So if you can always make it denser, I don't know why we're having as much of a discussion as we are, because the truth of the matter is somebody can always come in and say, I'm going to build a fourplex on that single family lot. And if that's what they want to do, we can't deny it with the middle housing code, because that's what the middle housing code does. So like I said, I guess I don't understand a lot of the concern. I can understand it for the middle housing code. I think it was truly an issue, but with the middle housing code coming forward, it is a little different because you can always choose to zone up.
DJ.
You know, and kind of building on that, what you had said, I forgot to mention this, incentivizing. If we look at these as two separate issues, what's going to be more impactful for density in our community? Is it going to be a zoning transition overlay, or is it going to be middle housing? I think it's very obviously going to be middle housing. It's incentivizing its options. It's happening. I think having both is, I don't think it's totally wise. We have a circumstance where DLCD has said, you have the option to take away the zoning transition overlay because by middle housing being applicable, you can meet your density goals mandated by the state, right? This is a very unique opportunity that we actually have input into how our land is going to be zoned. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this. Incentivizing is the way to go. Middle housing incentivizes it. And the zoning transition overlay, I think, should be a thing of the past.
All right, I guess, how do we see this moving forward, Brad? You had a couple of recommendations that that you would like to see us move forward with a local middle housing code. I think it sounds like we at least need to put to a council vote the zoning transition overlay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Aaron and I were just touching base. So yeah, it's one of the recommendations we mentioned was the middle housing code piece, and if, does council feel comfortable moving that ahead to a public hearing, so that, we would advertise that and hold a separate public hearing on just the middle housing without the zoning transition overlay piece, which is what you had last time, and that's where the public concern came in. So that's one. And then in terms of the zoning transition overlay itself, we could prepare a more detailed recommendation to you that looked at some timelines incorporating Councilor Auger's idea about giving folks a grace period, for lack of a better term, and then also working with the 11 property owners that already communicated with us and said they want to retain that zone, so that we can bring that forward as to get that zoning. So I think those are kind of the three pieces I think that we're seeing.
Okay, is there a particular order of operations where one affects the other, where we need to make a decision about the ZTO before moving forward on the middle housing code again?
Well, I think the public hearing for the middle housing code, we would change the language that is currently in the middle housing code that says single-family zoning, or that single-family housing is prohibited in those. That we would make that one change based on what we're hearing today. And then you would be able to address that, in detail at the public hearing. Unless you actually want to see we could also bring forward, the preliminary language, so that council could review that. And if that would make you feel more comfortable in terms of setting up the public hearing, rather than just going straight to a public hearing. But I don't think technically you would need to make a formal decision on the zoning transition overlay to proceed with the middle housing update.
Okay. So if we were to move forward with a public hearing for the middle housing code, as well as moving forward with a council business meeting where the council would consider repealing the ZTO, we can do those things simultaneously. Is that where you all see this going? Is there anything else? Okay, then we will do that. Next up on the agenda is Riverside Park bandshell. Hi, Josh. Did we get printouts for this one? Okay. That mic might be off.
We're here to discuss the Riverside Park stage and bandshell. This is a discussion the council has had before. The Riverside Park is a popular venue for hosting public events such as concerts in the park. However, we do not have a permanent stage or covered bandshell area, and a temporary structure must be erected every time that they want to hold a concert at Riverside Park. This presentation is just continuing the previous discussion with an update on concepts and cost implications. In relationship to council goals, it would be maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet the community needs and ensure that our park infrastructure adequately serves the community. I do believe Josie from the Chamber of Commerce is here, just to let everyone know. So a little background, there has been interest from council and the Chamber of Commerce to create a permanent structure to host events such as concerts in the park. As mentioned in the previous slide, the way it's operated in the past is concerts in the park bring in a trailer and they have to set up and remove that trailer every time they want to have an event. It's very cumbersome for their volunteers, and having a more fixed location to house these events not only would help the concerts in the parks with the chamber, but also potentially open it up for other people in the community. At the last time the council reviewed these options was June 7th of 2021. At the workshop, the general consensus was to look at creating an at-grade concrete slab with a clamshell on it. The clamshell structure is a retractable clamshell where you can take the cover off and then you fold the metal framing back and then you pull it back out and attach it when you are using it. The idea would be during the winter months, we would have the clamshell removed and just have the framing out there, with the summer concert seasons having it up and left up for people to use. At 2021, there was dedicated funding created for Riverside Park improvements, but that wasn't just for the clamshell structure and the stage. It also included expansion of our park maintenance shop and rebuilding renovation, which has recently been added to the historic registry, I believe. So when we picked this conversation back up, staff met on site with the Chamber of Commerce in November 2022. The idea was to kind of review the location, figure out what exactly the chamber really needed, and then see where we could go from there. All of the sites that were proposed were either located in the floodplain or the floodway. And then when speaking with the chamber, we found that an at-grade stage, just at the ground level, does not really meet the needs for the performers or the audience. Ideally, the stage would need to be raised. Because of the slopage of the area, we don't have like a bowl down at the bottom with like a hillside going up that people could sit on and everything like that. And so it's not like a natural amphitheater field. And then if we are doing a raised stage, that would include needing of adding stairs to it, ADA accessibility to it. And then either way, we'd be wanting to add some sort of accessible drive path so that performers can offload their instruments and things like that, make it a little bit more easier. Another issue we found when reviewing it on site with the chamber is the current site location does only have single-phase 200 amps available for power. And with that, it really limits the number of vendors and performers the chamber is able to attract to our park system. A lot of them are requiring 3-phase 400 amps now for them to even come play at your performances. Additionally, it makes it pretty much impractical for them to have other vendors down there as well using the power, whether that's food trucks or anything else like that. And it was reported that there was at least one time that the current system just didn't hold up to the load, even though they weren't using over it. It's just an older system in place, and it kind of derailed one of their concerts for a little bit.
Excuse me, can you get all up in that microphone? It's a little bit difficult to hear you.
So with that, we did develop a new concept for this with the addition of the 3-phase 400 amp service. To do that, it would be approximately a 490-foot run underground from East Park Street, and they'd have to install transformers above any base flood elevation and things like that. Let me see real quick, we skipped the slide. So skipping back here, this is the locations that council had previously looked at. In the yellow is where the floodplain or floodway is. That's where they normally would have the concerts with the removable stage. Putting it out there doesn't really work for us anymore. Not only is it in the floodway, but we also have sewer lines going through that area, and we've got development setbacks that we'd have to follow. The other option that was put out there was putting it in the middle of the field. This really would limit the amount of audience we'd be able to house. And so the only real option was the one over in the corner closest to where the floodplain ends. The floodplain's the blue. With that, the nice thing about that option is with the clamshell structure, it would project sound back towards the rest of the park and towards the highway to help disperse it a little bit more, as opposed to going down the riverway towards the residential locations. So in the red circle is the location that we were speaking about now. So moving down, the new concept is to add 3-phase 400 amp. It's about a 490-foot run to be able to fully do that service. We would be looking at a raised stage of approximately 4 feet. The dimensions of the stage that we had engineering look at are on the slide. With that, we do have the accessible ramps, stairs, pathways, and then the retractable clamshell structure. And on this map, we've got the FEMA floodway boundary and then the floodplain boundary. This stage was pretty much in the middle between the floodway and the floodplain, so we still have to do the development permitting processes for being able to build within the floodplain. As far as estimated timelines, from the construction, engineering, and permitting, we're looking at 6 to 8 months out. The clamshell structure, if we were to order it today, would be 2 to 3 months out. And the biggest issue is the 3-phase 400 amp power. And speaking with PG&E, they reported that would be 9 to 12 months out before they'd have the transformers in for delivery. And that's, yeah, there's a lot of lead time on those ones now. As far as revenue sources go, LB 6395 is Riverside Park improvements. With that, there's a little under $400,000 available for all 3 projects. That would have been the stage, maintenance shop expansion, and rebuilding and renovations. The known estimated costs we've received back from engineering, PG&E, and all these folks comes in at $264,223, which is a lot more than what council originally looked at back in 21. Back in 21, when you guys looked at it, the budget range was between $110,000 to $125,000 for an at-grade concrete slab, and that was without any of the engineering or any of the power upgrades or anything like that included in it. So with that, the clamshell has actually stayed pretty solid. That hasn't increased that much in price. The stage construction itself, to be able to build a raised stage in this location, is one of the larger increases. That we know that the power itself was estimated to be about $40,000. And with the power upgrade, there is ongoing fees associated with that. We could either buy out or pay a monthly charge. There are a lot of unknowns still. That would be anything for contingency, further construction, permitting, and costs like that with engineering. Then building, electrical, and floodway permits would not be something we've accounted for yet. And then the power excavation for approximately 470 feet, and then extending it down to the floodplain itself, approximately 50 feet. With that, it's all underground, and essentially PG&E will come in and lay the lines and then do all the work for the transformers and whatnot, but it's up to the contractor to lay the trenching and everything. And whenever you're trenching that much of a park, you have to be a little bit concerned about tree roots and things like that. It is being proposed to trench around the fence line where the ball field is, so depending on where it is, we would likely impact some of those trees. And then the other part we haven't gotten a quote on yet is for the electrical equipment for the stage itself. That'd be like the box, fuses, and actually getting set up to where it can be used down in the floodplain. If it's built next to the stage, it basically just has to be built above the base flood elevation of the location. And then the power company did mention that they would be required to get easements to put all that through, so that's something else as far as costs associated with it we haven't looked into yet. So other considerations, the stage project's current cost does deplete the maintenance or that whole LB code a lot. It would not leave a lot left for the other park projects that were called out for it, which would be the maintenance shop expansion and rebuilding or renovation. The park maintenance shop expansion is definitely one that is becoming more of a need since we've increased staffing in that location after we increased staffing overall. Biggest issue at the park maintenance shop is really the ingress and egress. We only have one gate to come in and out of, and with the way the parking lot is, it makes our staff either have to back into park or they're backing out into an active parking lot. And there's not a lot of room at that maintenance shop location with the fence and everything like that for storing materials. And it creates just a lot of like near miss hazards where people can basically be backing into things on accident. There is also just small break rooms that kind of doubles as an office area, limited storage, limited parking. And yeah, again, it's just more of increasing safety concerns as we have more bodies working out of there now. There's just more vehicles coming in and out. The Reed Building is a historic building. It needs to have some sort of historic preservation or restoration plan. The original thought behind redoing the park maintenance shop was to renovate the Reed Building as well so that it could be doubled as basically office space for staff, and there's been talk about law enforcement using it as substations and things like that. I don't know if there's any interest at this point with it. As far as the historic side of the building goes, we do need to look into and come up with a plan for that sooner than later. In my experience, if we don't, then it just gets mothballed until it slowly deteriorates. And with that, it kind of just needs to know what level of restoration we're able to do. Sometimes I've ran into it where you have to keep the exterior of a building completely historically accurate, but you can change the interior. Other times I've ran into it where both interior and exterior have to be up to historic standards, whatever the home was, which there's architects that specialize in that we need to get a plan for. And then one of the other considerations is the permanent space or stage would take up space that other events are currently using, and that's Boatnik, Back to the 50 car show. We just have to plan around it. That's where Boatnik puts the carnival rides and things like that. Back to the 50s car show, that's right at the cusp of where we don't let them park because we're getting into that critical root zone for trees, but they would still need to shift around it. And that's just one of those things. Those two major events could have a small impact on it. So call to actions, council discretion. As far as alternatives go, we can move this to another workshop, direct staff to proceed with the project, and then we'll figure out the rest of the information on cost-wise and start moving down the timelines with leads and stuff. And then another option would be not to proceed with the project at this time or direct staff to plan for other projects identified in the LB 6395, which would have been the park maintenance shop or Reed Building or combination of the two. Questions?
Thanks, Josh. Rick has a question.
Thank you, Josh. Way back when money was set aside for a community center in the park, and I didn't know if that could be an additional source of revenue for us on this project.
You're talking about the Isaac Walton building. That fund was set aside to develop a community center or like type facility. And I know the former finance director looked into it, and the current finance director has looked into it a little bit. I think we just haven't gotten a clear understanding of where we can or what we can use those funds for. That's obviously a potential if council would like. Additionally, we might look to use those funds in other areas. My general thought would be it was a park-related facility, so it'd be nice to keep all those funds in a park if we're not going to use them for stuff like that. And then there are some other larger projects that Riverside does need. It's really, the parking lot could use resealing, restriping, and some maintenance as well. It's took it a beating over the last decade or so.
Thank you.
DJ?
Yeah, so we have these park maintenance shop, these three things that are kind of inside of this. And when I look at all these three, I'm seeing that we're having some safety concerns. The ingress and egress, that one is pretty well explained, safety of ingress and egress of vehicles. But we're talking about the maintenance shop, it says safety concerns are increasing. And so in making these decisions, you know, if I'm thinking about something really fun for the community, but we have actual legitimate safety concerns for people, we should really be thinking about those safety priorities. So could you expand a little bit about the safety concerns that you have in the maintenance shop?
So the safety concerns are the same concerns we've had for several years at the maintenance shop, as far as a lot of it is with the ingress and egress, and then just the overall lack of space inside that main shop cart compound. We added 2 additional staff members to our team during last budget cycle. With that, we've added the number of people that we have working out of that location. So it has just compounded those near miss type safety concerns that we'd have, where somebody could potentially have an accident by backing into something. Those are the main safety concerns with that building and shop. Is a lot of it is just vehicle related, and then the rest of it's partly the creature comfort of making sure we have adequate break spaces and everything like that for the amount of staff we do have working out of there. And then staging. With our material prep and everything like that, the current facility, again, is just a small facility that doesn't allow for us to stage a lot of materials, so we end up losing efficiency by going back to Reinhardt to pick stuff up, as opposed to having it a couple of different storage bays added in. There was like a tentative plan made for possibly expanding out the park fencing that would accommodate all of those things. I don't think it really it was on a CAD file, but I don't think it actually got put through engineering or anything like that.
What'd you say there at the end?
It was basically just the GIS map with the potential, more of a conceptual plan, but it never got put through to like get actually developed out with engineering or anything.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just have a question, because I really haven't been down to see what storage is at the park at Riverside. So how many things you have stored at Riverside, as opposed, I do know that, you know, the Reinhardt spot, because of the staffing, is an issue. Is there land at Reinhardt that obviously we own at this point for any expansion there? And then, once again, how much stuff right now is stored at the Riverside location?
So we try to keep storage minimal at Riverside because it is a smaller facility, and you know, we've got basically whatever they need for their day-to-day landscaping needs. And then I think we try to store like 1 or 2 pieces of equipment tractor-wise or daily mowers that they use. But again, a lot of stuff has to go back and forth between Reinhardt and Riverside. With Reinhardt, in our current shop location, there's really not a lot of room to expand without, I mean, we've got a basketball court right behind us and then property boundary on one side, without taking up a large part of like the parking areas, unless we were to build a completely off-site location somewhere else in that park system. And the only place that really makes sense to do that might conflict with future plans for putting the Allen Creek road across, because that's where we kind of have our large bin storage and stuff like that. So there's really not a good spot to do like a large expansion of Reinhardt. The idea would be to focus on expanding Riverside so that when our staff are out at that location. One thing about Riverside, we do have staff that work out there every day, but they normally don't report to that location in the mornings except for during the summertime. So the summertime is when we have the most issues with these ingress, egress issues. And that also is at the same time that we have the most usage of the park system too.
Other questions, Dwayne?
I don't know if you could answer, didn't we used to block that road off right in there to go into the parking area at some point for that maintenance shop? Maybe it's before your time. Anybody know we used to block it off so you couldn't park up there by the maintenance shop in Riverside Park? And maybe it's because I've been around for 40 years. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't recall a time that we were actually blocking that off.
Is that where you're hitting the cars, backing in and out of there?
Yeah, it's just a really tight operating spot in that area, the way it's designed. We do have parking and people do utilize that for public parking, but we also have our E-plates and other things that are utilizing that space for turnaround and operations.
That's all I really had, really.
Okay. Any other questions? Vanessa?
Was Urban Renewal Agency funds considered for a potential funding source as well?
No.
Aaron?
I think at this point, one of the things that I think we could do is, from a standpoint of having efficiency, effectiveness in the park system, I think it's imperative for us to do some of the changes. One, it's a historic building and we need to make sure we maintain that, that infrastructure. And then looking at the where we're moving and redesigning some of that for our workstations and other things is extremely important. Also moving forward with the impacts to the parks, we need to build some additional infrastructure there. And I think we can do that through some slight modifications to some LB project dollars that, and make that happen, I believe. I think the one thing that we're wanting to know is, do you want to, recognizing that the cost of the bandshell has gone up since the last time we talked. The last time we talked, I think the bandshell was around 150, but we've changed the design of the bandshell and the impact of the bandshell, and the electrical is something that you need now. Do you want us to continue forward with the bandshell? And we will make sure that that's a priority in this current LB fund, but also in the upcoming budget year when staff is working with the LB projects, and when we bring LB projects forward to you here in the coming up at some point, March 13th, we'll likely be prioritizing some funds to complete the 2 other projects that are in this LB. So I think at this point, it's, are you still interested in doing this community project at this scale? Because it's a different scale than what we were talking about before.
Well, I think it'd be a good time to have Josie then talk to us about the chamber and their interest in potentially using a bandshell.
So I know this has been a discussion for a long time. The chamber would love to see a permanent stage down there. And we actually reached out to several other communities and they used the clamshell design with a raised stage. And that's why we thought it would work best for Riverside, especially because not only our event, but other events, you get quite a large crowd and you really need that elevated stage so all the attendees can actually see the performance and enjoy going out to that. So we really didn't feel that just having a concrete slab would really work. You're not really adding what's needed. So we definitely think not only for concerts in the park, but any event that's held there, you need the elevated stage. And I'll say for the power requirements, you know, we've been using the park for a long time and we've used it at its level, but it is a big concern because like Josh said, we brought in a pretty big band and the power went out several times. So we can use it in its current form, but it would definitely be improvement to bring in food trucks and also have a band playing at the same time to have that increased power.
So it sounds like, I mean, obviously the chamber did not use the park last year for concerts in the park, but that you would be interested in using it in the future if this facility were there.
Yes, so our board did talk about this And we all said that Riverside, we would like it to be the home of Concerts in the Park. This upcoming year, since there is not a permanent stage, we will stay at the fairgrounds, but ultimately we want to move back to Riverside. And that would be a deciding factor. If that permanent stage was there, it would be much safer for our volunteers, because the current stage we're using, which actually used to be the city stage, it's not safe, and we don't want to have our volunteers. It takes about 6 strong people to put it up, and it really is on its last leg. So we need to find a different alternative, and that's a big reason. At the fairgrounds, we can leave it up the entire time, but we do want to come back to Riverside. That's our home for Concerts in the Park.
It's good to hear. Does anybody have any questions for Josie? Vanessa?
Thanks for coming today, Josie. The last time that we spoke about this was a long time ago, but there was a mention that the chamber might have a connection for a potential sponsor for the project. Does that still stand?
Yes, that does still stand, and they definitely are interested in sponsoring. And so they really just need to know what that would look like, the amount. And they did ask if they sponsored, if their name could be on it somewhere. So they're definitely still interested. So that would be another source of funding.
Did they articulate the amount that they'd be willing to sponsor, if that was like half or full, or what that might look like?
They really just need more information. They didn't want to throw out a number because they needed more information, what that sponsorship would look like and how much would be needed.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good to know. Sounds like another conversation. Val?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a question. I'm ready for a
Are
discussion.
we ready? Does anybody have questions for Josie? No? Okay, thank you, Josie. All right, Val.
Yeah, when I first got on council back in 2015, I was there when we got the money for the whatever they're called. And so we built the place where for Boatnick. So that was it. And we went through and did this, but it was just as important at the time. And it was a really big thing in the community to have concerts in the park and have some sort of theater staging. Because in a sense, that's kind of what the Isaac Walton building was, as it was a place for the community to come together. My oldest daughter took dance classes there. There was musical events. It was a place to come together. So I understand the safety ads and all those, but it's kind of like we talked about in strategic planning. We need more fun things and things for young adults to do in our community. And I think that if we were just to move and shove it out of the way, that would be a mistake on our part. I do think there's people in the community that would help sponsor and get this moving, because I think this would be a great community effort to keep concerts in the park in our park, and have something safe and have something that could be around for a long time. So I am not in favor of letting this go. I would like to keep the plan there and look into some community sponsorship moving forward. I understand the need for safety, and I understand going down and looking at what we need and working with the parks to have something there. But I just think that, I don't want to give up Riverside Park as a gym in our community and give up the ability to do music there.
DJ?
Sure, I'll echo that. What really brought my interest back, given the increase in cost, was Chamber coming, and you guys would like to see this. When you said that this is the home of concerts in the park, I kind of, you're right. And Valerie, we do need to do fun things, and we do need things for our community to do, and that Riverside Park is a premier park to do it. Mm-hmm. And given that we could even have some sponsorship potential, I think that this is just a win-win. So I can get behind this.
Rob?
So, well, of course, a big part of me is behind it, and I'm just wondering at what point would we have any idea what the sponsorship what the sponsorship contribution would be. In other words, if we were to vote to go ahead with this, are we essentially saying that we're going to support paying for the whole thing, if that's what it turned out to be? At what point could we possibly know what level of financial impact this would have on our budget? Because if right now, if today we knew a really significant figure from sponsorships, it would be really easy to get behind it 100%. But I'm just wondering, I don't know if Josie knows or anyone else knows, but it'd be great before we gave a go-ahead if we had any idea the ballpark of what we'd be committing to.
Well, I guess it's my opinion that at this point, we need to decide whether we want to move forward with the project. It's kind of an entirely separate discussion, whether we would want to do naming rights and how much that, we would value that at. Josie already answered the question that the potential sponsor would like, some more information. So there's not really an offer on the table, but I think that's a different conversation because it has kind of bigger implications about whether we do naming rights than we're probably prepared to discuss right now. Brad, do you need to know, what would be the next step, I guess, in moving forward with this? Or Josh could answer it, I guess.
Well, we can tag team. I mean, I think that we've gotten a bid on the bandshell, which of course is only good for so much time. I think we've gotten some preliminary engineering at that location on a 4-foot high stage, with the stairs, with the ADA. I think one of the key things we were hoping for is at the level that Josh presented, is that the end product that you want to see. And if so, then we can continue to work with the chamber on the sponsorship piece and then, bring back a much more dialed in budget in terms of the revenue side in this. But as both Josh and Aaron mentioned, you're having the conversation, but this weighing this maintenance piece, which our adopted budget does identify both of these projects. So we would push out a little bit further. If you see the stage as being, the priority, we would likely need to push out a little bit further that improvements on the maintenance yard at Riverside, given the product that was presented to you today.
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to move forward and separate some of these pieces. So with regards to just the bandshell project at this stage, do you need a council vote to move forward, or do you need council direction? Like what?
So at this point, it'd be council direction, basically saying, yes, you guys are interested in us continuing to look at this project. Our next step would be to continue the engineering side to make sure that what we're going to be building, we get more firm cost estimates, things like that, and go through the engineering process to make sure what we're going to build matches the floodplain rules and everything like that. We would then put in the order for the clamshell after we had the engineering, knowing it's not that far out compared to the actual building. The biggest thing that we have as far as a holdup would be the power upgrades and everything like that, but we could put in those orders too. I think first thing we'd want to just finish up the engineering side and make sure that if we are building a raised stage out there, it's going to be permitted through the floodplain rules.
And during that time, we can look at what a sponsorship level we might have. We've got regulations associated with sponsorships and naming of things in the parks, and we need to follow those codes also. But we can explore that option with the potential sponsor that Josie mentioned.
Okay, so I guess in the interest of efficiency here, if we were to move forward, if council's interested in moving forward with the bandshell and having staff work on that, and then simultaneously we need to schedule probably another workshop where we talk about naming rights and what a potential sponsorship value would be.
I can just get you that in a memo and see
memo.
if there's anything above and beyond a memo that might be required, then maybe have a workshop after that, but a memo might suffice based on our findings.
Okay, And then I'm thinking that we maybe also need to have a discussion about the other elements at Riverside Park with a kind of comprehensive look at where those budget line items could come from if we wanted to move forward.
And that might potentially be addressed in our LB project discussion review on March 13th.
Okay. Does that, I don't want to jump the gun here, we haven't had very much discussion, but is that where we're heading? Does anybody else want to say now that, okay. I just don't want us to all, have to reaffirm that we're interested in that, because I think that the council's already interested, barring some specifics, Okay, do you need anything else from us on that at this time? Okay. Yeah, we'll look for that memo about the sponsorship, and then if we need to have further discussion on that, we will do so. Okay, next up, Park Exclusion Hearings Officer, Augustus. Thanks for being here, Josie. I know you waited a long time.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Sorry, I want to apologize in advance. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything prepped for this. I didn't think that it would require it. Just kind of as a brief background, Council gave instruction to staff to find a hearings officer for park exclusion hearings. Approximately 3 weeks ago, we got another appeal. Since that time, I've reached out to 6 individuals, 5 practicing attorneys and 1 retired attorney. Out of those 5, we have 1 unavailable, 2 unwilling, 1 non-response, 1 with a tepid response, and 1 who is absolutely willing to do so. That individual who's willing to do so is Kendall Ferguson. She provided a very short bio to us yesterday while no one was in the office. That's why you didn't get it ahead of time. She's a practicing attorney and a partner at Sorensen, Ransom, and Ferguson down on D Street. She has experience as a pro tem judge, just read as a judge that can fill in, a circuit judge who can fill in when necessary. She's been practicing law in Grants Pass for the last 13 years. I've worked with Ms. Ferguson in the past when I worked with the county. She's not only competent, but she's very kind and very compassionate. So she is the individual that I would be recommending to council to serve as the hearings officer for our next parks exclusion hearings. And with that, I'll field any questions.
Do you need from the council a formal vote to accept?
So really the thing that I think we need to figure out might be compensation.
Resolution which council approved provided direction and authority for staff to contract with the hearings officer. So we technically don't need any formal motion from council, but through that adoption of the resolution, council did say that they wanted to review any potential candidates. So this was the one candidate we found, and we're bringing it forward for your consideration.
Okay. Council, do you have any questions? Val?
Just, do we have anything to go on in terms of compensation for what a hearings officer is normally? I mean, I guess if we're going to be making that decision, is there anything we have to go on?
We'll just go on, we'll take a look and see what other communities have done for hearings officers in our region and go off something that's fair and reasonable that could be negotiated between the 2 parties.
Joel, then Vanessa?
If the plaintiff appeals, I'm not sure it's a plaintiff or defendant.
Appellee and respondent.
Appellant appeals, is there recourse then?
So no, because remember that the only issue for the park exclusion hearing is whether they received 2 park exclusion notices in a 1-year period in any of the city parks. That's the only thing. So the citations that they've received are going to be adjudicated in the circuit court.
Vanessa?
Do you see any value of retaining an individual that is based in our community versus someone who is detached from our community?
As in, do I prefer one over the other? I think Ms. Ferguson, she's worked and lived here. I mean, I think that she's in a pretty good position to, help with these sorts of decisions that are impacting our community. I think there's probably value to somebody who does live here.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, so based on what I've heard, staff will reach out to her, we'll figure out what compensation is in our area, and then we'll contract with her. At the point that we have a contract, we will set that park exclusions hearing for the soonest possible date.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're glad you took care of that. All right, agenda review. Next up, next meeting is actually a workshop next Monday. We have consideration of amending our parking ordinances. That would be citywide, not specific to the downtown area. We have a budget committee orientation, and we have a public hearing on the PERS reserve and an executive session regarding labor. And then we have a business meeting next Wednesday with a public hearing to consider an ordinance that would amend the comp plan. We have a council action item that would consider an ordinance increasing the city manager's spending authority. We have council action item that would be a resolution adopting the strategic plan, and council action item that's a resolution awarding the Portland Luz installation contract. And then the consent calendar items are a motion that would approve the findings of fact on, this was written weird last week and I don't remember what I changed it to, but it's not correct the way it's written. Sooner Redwood Hog doesn't mean anything. It's like somebody's playing a practical joke on me, but I don't have it in front of me what the actual terminology should be. Do you?
It's the Redwood Tower.
Redwood Tower.
Medical marijuana.
Thank you. And then, resolution to approve the street sweeping contract change. Any questions about next week? All right, and looking out into the future, is there anything that you wanted to get on the agenda that's not there now? DJ.
Yeah, I have a request for a memo. March 13th, we have a DMO presentation from Tori. I've been asking for metrics on TLTs. I need numbers to gauge success here. Minimum 10 years, TLT revenues. I don't need it to be wordy. I think we all kind of understand. Just be quick, concise. These are what it was. These are the circumstances. And if I can get that before March 13th, I'd appreciate it.
I've reached out to Tori and talked to her about some of that, and so you're wanting something from her in advance of the meeting that we would provide you in a memo?
Yeah, my motivation would be to see those numbers prior to the meeting. It would be nice if that was part and parcel to the presentation as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's information that I would like to absorb prior to the meeting.
Okay, and go back, if possible, 10 years, wherever we have strong data.
Yeah, if your data starts to get fuzzy at 8 or 9 years, don't worry about it. Just use 10 years as a realistic benchmark.
Okay.
I also don't know that this is something we need from her, but more something from our own business office.
Yeah, I'd say that's correct. We don't have to ask Tori to get this information for us because the information's out there.
Because we've been collecting the tax, right?
You're looking for
years.
the financial data of what we've been collecting and distributing then for over 10 years. Oh, okay, got it.
I think that was the ask, right? Is the 10-year revenue, DJ?
Yeah. Annual revenue back 10 years. Okay. Yep.
No problem.
Okay. Anything else? Vanessa?
I had a question on February 27th. I see the CFEC parking regulation discussion. I know that's a pretty wide-ranging set of rules, and I was curious, the focus for just on parking. Is that just trying to boil it down, or what are we doing? What's our intention there?
You're talking February 13th, I'm sorry, I was typing.
That's okay. February 27th, the potential parking regulations related to CFEC?
Yeah, there is in the rules right now a series of deadlines that we need to meet, and one of them is coming up in June, and it is specific to parking, and we have 2 or 3 options under the rules, the CFEC rules, that we can choose. And so the purpose of that workshop is to outline for you what those options are in the climate-friendly rules, and then decide, give a staff direction on which one of those you want us to pursue.
Thank you.
Rick, and then Valerie.
I also would like to see some information on the DMO. I realize the old records may lack definition as to what occurred, as for instance in advertising, their size of their advertising budget and who they used and so forth. But I didn't know when they bring their presentation, will they have that information for us?
They should have a detailed report. I have been talking with Tori, and she's excited to actually come to you and provide the information for you. But if there's anything specific that you'd make sure you want us to hit on, let me know, and I'll make sure I make those notes. But you mentioned, Counselor, the type of advertising and any contracted advertisers that they've worked with as part of that. I've made that note there, and we'll pass that along with anything else that council might think of. But there are some parameters within the contract that she's supposed to be reporting, and she'll be fulfilling those. But if there's anything extra that you can think of, let me know.
Okay, that'd be great. And if, like DJ said, if could get a copy of that report early, so if there are more questions, I could forward those to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Val.
I just had something. I'm happy to see the public safety funding on February 27th, but one of the things that we talked about was the water rate study, because if we're going to, that's a part of the water bill study, is kind of a part of the public safety and the future of the public safety and what sort of things we're going to be going out to the public with. So I guess this morning when I was with Government Affairs with Joel, people in the community are kind of asking us, what can we do? How can we get involved to have a community discussion about public safety and what choices are being put forth for potentials? And obviously, we're not really seeing anything necessary from the county. So starting to get a lot of that questioning from the outside. And I think this is a good time to kind of branch out and reach to them to come in and make, to come in with us on that conversation. And I don't know exactly how to do that. And I know we had talked about having that rate study with water so that, as we talk about putting things on the water bill, we have an idea of what else is coming down from the prices of that. So I think that's something we have to get right on top of.
So the rate thing is, it would be another issue associated with that. But if they're wanting to take a look at options, we can talk about this Wednesday, but I'd be more than happy to have myself and some staff members do a little mini forum with chamber members, sort of like we did before. Brad and CD worked with some stuff, and we'll do a little session. It won't be any new information that you have not received. It'd be information you've already received. So they're not getting something you don't already have. We're just going to be providing it to them. We'll go through the process almost as if they were council, give them the options and discuss, and maybe we'll get some feedback on where their preferences are that we can report back to you.
Yeah, I think that would be really good.
Okay, I'll reach out to Josie on that one.
Thank you.
Just a note, now that you've pointed out the February 27th workshop to me, we're probably going to have to do something about that because it has way too much on it. So things may change. I mean, the only thing, to be honest, Council, that I've been able to do to keep us from sitting here for 4 hours on a Monday is to limit the number of items we have on the agenda. And obviously, we had a lot today, and that one just looks huge again. And we had talked about cutting back and only doing 2 workshops a month, but we can't front load everything. And Anyway, Brian.
I just wanted to follow up on Valerie's ask because it didn't sound like the water rate analysis piece was necessarily picked up by staff. It sounded like you went a different way with it. And so I just wanted to close the loop on that to make sure that that part was heard as well.
Yeah, we have not started that. I mean, I know that it was identified in strategic planning. We haven't adopted the strategic plan yet. I was hoping to get a little bit more clear direction on what exactly we were studying in regards to the utility rates. In the meeting, you kind of alluded that it was not just water specific, but to the utility bill. And so I'm going to need some more direction before I get somebody under contract to help do that analysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anything else?
We're passing on a document here. Our very proactive finance director loves to listen to council meetings when he's not here. And so he has some information on you the past 10 years of TLT revenues.
There's a typo in 2016.
Wow. How's that for service? All right. And I think we're done for today. Brian?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second from Val. All in favor of adjourning today, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, we'll see you next Monday.